Hi, everybody. Welcome to the SY0-601 Security Plus Study Group pre-show. We'll be getting started in 10 minutes. We've got all Security Plus questions in this first hour, and then I'll open up the phone lines in the second hour, which reminds me that I need to start Skype on this side. We're on day 2 of 2 in a row. We did a Network Plus study group yesterday, and we're doing the Security Plus study group today. We don't often do back-to-back, but here we are. My schedule is just weird this month. We have this month and next month. So we got 2 this week. This is the second of 2. And then next week is 2. Next week are 2 A-plus study groups. But they're not back to back. They are Tuesday, Thursday. So maybe not as intense. There's a lot that goes into kind of putting these together, and I'm kind of used to doing 1 a week, and doing 2 days in a row just is very different. Very different. That's okay. We're good. Hey, everybody. Is the 601 much harder or more material? Well, more material would be harder, wouldn't it? So yes, having to memorize 30% more material was already a big certification. Now let's do 30% more. It's much bigger. So yeah, because it is much larger, there's much more to memorize. Therefore, it's, from that perspective, harder. I don't think the difficulty level is harder. I don't think that's a higher difficulty level. I think the difficulty level is you're still at normal. You didn't set the game to hard. You're still at normal, but now there's 10 more levels you have to go through. There you go. There's my game comparison from that person. Like, I don't know. Yes, 30%. It's big. It's huge. I did a video of why you shouldn't wait to take the 601. Because some people very early on were saying, oh, I'm just going to wait. I'll take the new version. And I said, you might not want to do that. You might want to wait, not wait and take the current version. You might be much better off. You would be much better off. There's no might about it. You would be much better off. So that's how that goes. That's how that goes. The 601 release was pretty quick, though not unprecedented. It was late. It wasn't quick. It was late. They pushed it because of COVID. So and then they did a much longer migration between the two. So you can still take the 501 right now, and you should. 501 still good, still available until July 31st. You should take it if you can. That's my recommendation. That's what that video was about, was if you have the choice between the 501 and 601, and passing either one of these gives you identically exactly the same result, why wouldn't you take the 501? That doesn't even make sense. Why would you take the 601? And that doesn't mean some people won't. Some people will still take the 601 because reasons. I don't know why. They want to, which is, I can't argue with that. Sure, go ahead. Knock yourself out. And people have been. They've been taking the 601. So, do you think a guy could pass the 501 by studying hard, really hard for a week? No, I don't. The average is 3 months. Now, unless you already in the industry, you've already been working with this technology, you're already familiar with security, you've already done these things, then yeah, you could do it in a week. But if that's the case, you probably don't need it, right? You probably don't need the certification. Maybe there was a reason you need the certification. There are some organizations that require you to have it. So if you were walking in with a background in IT security, then yeah, you could. But I know people are taking the 601. They feel that it's the one that they wanted to take. Well, rock on. You've still got some, there's back in November when this was released, there were no books. There were no books until January. That's last month when the first books came out. So there's still much more 501 content out there than there is 601. So you can take the 601 and you can pass the 601, but you're at a disadvantage. right there, you're at a disadvantage. So, yeah, but the DoD directive doesn't apply. It doesn't discriminate over which certification exam you take. It just wants Security Plus. So you can take the 501 and earn your Security Plus, or you can take the 601 and earn your Security Plus. The end result is exactly the same because the certification itself, the Security Plus certification, doesn't have a version. So somebody seeing that you're Security Plus certified, you could have taken the 301 and simply renewed it over the last 10 years and still be Security Plus certified and still be able to apply that directive to it. So that's it. The scoring is exactly the same. The structure of the exam is effectively the same. Some of the topics are different. They're in different order. Some of the things have different names now because that's the world we live in. But I think overall, the things they updated and changed weren't bad things. They're just different. They did kind of change the scope of the exam. We can talk about this in the after show in much more detail. They kind of changed the approach to Security Plus a bit. They tweaked it just a little bit. The part that was surprising to me was the amount of additional exam objectives they added. They increased the size of the certification by 30%, which is just huge now. It is remarkable. It's surprising to me more people aren't mentioning this, but it is such a bigger exam now, much bigger. It's sort of like both A+ exams combined together is now the size of Security Plus. We're almost at the point where we could split this into different exams. Is that coming next? Would that be the next rev? Or maybe they figure out, wow, that was a lot of stuff. Maybe we shouldn't do that. I don't get that impression. After seeing presentations from CompTIA, after seeing what their approach was to creating the 601, I didn't get the opinion from that they were at all concerned with the size. Like, of course we're going to make it bigger because it needs to be bigger. I don't know that it needs to be bigger, but it did. But it is. And just to give you an idea, most of my courses, things like Network Plus is 100 videos, 101 videos, something like that. A+ is 55, 60 videos a piece. This 601 exam is going to be 176 videos. And I'm already halfway through. 176 videos for this course. I don't know if that's necessary. In fact, there's quite a bit of content on the exam. I personally don't feel is necessary, but I understand where they're coming from. I understand why they put the content on there. But when you make an exam that's everything to everyone, this is sort of what you get. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's sort of what they've created. Is an exam that's just big. It's everything to everyone. And I think the focus on Security Plus, kind of the big customer of Security Plus, is the federal government. So that's it. Are you supposed to be in a Discord or something to get the most out of this? No, we look at the back of my head for an hour. No, we haven't started yet. So you're in the right place. You're in the chat room. There will be more than the back of my head in just a moment. We will, in 1 minute, it's 11:59. In 1 minute, we will start the study group. So yes, this is a very boring part where you get to hear me make sure that I'm recording. Recording is on. Video looks good up here. You can kind of see my video setup. So these are the big ones. This is the preview window, and this is the window you see, the program window. And then the 4 underneath that are the 4 camera feeds that I give you during this. So I check and make sure those are up. Those look good. So I think we're good. Don't have a Discord. Try to Discord. Discord doesn't work for me, for us. There's a chat on my website already. So dividing the chat room, bought my Network Plus course notes yesterday after the study group. Thank you. Thank you for purchasing those. It really does go a long way to keeping this craziness going. And I appreciate it. Hopefully it's valuable as well. It's not, there's more to it than just keeping the lights on. I think it really helps you with your studies. Well, look at that. It's top of the hour. Let's make sure that I got a green light on my keynote. Keynote. Let's play. That looks good. It's time for study group, everybody. Let's do this. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the February 2021 Professor Messer SY0-601 Security Plus Study Group. We have for you questions and answers today that come directly from the CompTIA exam objectives for the SY0-601. This is the latest and greatest of Security Plus certifications. We were just talking about that in the pre-show, and everything that we're going to do today is all about Security Plus. In this first hour, I will ask you questions that come directly from those exam objectives. In the second hour, we have our after show, which sometimes is longer than our normal show, where I'll open up the phone lines. You can call in, you can ask questions in the chat room, whatever you'd like to do. It's easy enough to make that happen. You, if you are here live, can participate live, interactively, on the internet. So one of the ways you do this is you can pop open a new browser window and visit this link, professormesser.com/QA. That is the link that will get a question on the screen right now that you can answer interactively. There is also a mobile app you can use. If you're one of those people with your crazy smartphones, you kids, with your, here's my crazy smartphone. The Socrative student app is what you want. It's a really nice app. This is the service we use, is Socrative. So the app you want is the one for students. There's a Socrative teacher app. That's the one for me. You get the Socrative student app. And if you use that, it will ask you for a room name. The room name is Professor Messer, all one word, PROFESSORMESSER. So that is the name you need. Make sure you spell it right. You don't spell it right, then you are in trouble. You got big problems if that's the case. If you do all of that correctly, there will be a question waiting for you. And that question says, which of the following is responsible for enforcing rules during a cybersecurity exercise? And I have a number of options available that you will find. Is it the white team, the purple team, the red team, or the blue team? So this is one where if you are ever working through the details of an exam, this is where we would start. This is a question from last month. And if you are watching this from last month, we do this rewind question first to make sure people can get in and answer the question. And so you should put your answer in there as well. Please, no answers in the chat room, no hints in the chat room. That's sort of our standing rule. Thank you for being here in the SY0-601 Security Plus study group. We have many things happening right now with Security Plus. It's a relatively new certification exam version. So there are videos being produced constantly. I think last week I produced and put at least 10 videos out. Over the last month, there have been about 50 videos, 60 videos that have been added online. And there's many, many more to come. I have a whole chunk I haven't even edited yet, and another 50 or so videos that I still have to shoot. So there's plenty more. And if you want to see those videos, you want to be part of that, make sure you visit our YouTube channel, professormesser.com/YouTube. And you can, of course, have a look at those. There is a weekly pop quiz question for Security Plus. You can find that on my Twitter feed at professormesser.com/Twitter. Or if you like pretty pictures with your questions, you can get it at professormesser.com/Instagram. That would be able to find what you need to find from those links right there. So we've got two different certifications that we're dealing with right now. Well, one certification, but two different exams. So right now, you could take one of two different certification exams and earn your Security Plus. You get to choose which one. So the first one is the SY0-501. This was an exam that was released on October the 4th of 2017. It will be retired on July 31st. So July 31st is, you have all of that time now. We're sitting here at the end of February. You have plenty of time to study and take this exam. For most of you, I think the average for most folks is about 3 months. You got plenty of time, if that's the case, to be able to learn everything, finish up your studies, earn that certification by taking the SY0-501 exam. And when you pass that exam, even if you take the exam on July 31st and you pass, it's still good for 3 years. So the exam is different than the certification. The exam questions go away in July. Your certification will continue to be valid for 3 years. Of course, CompTIA updates their exams usually about every 3 years. So there was an update in November to the SY0-601 exam. Brand new set of exams, brand new set of questions, brand new set of exam objectives. This was probably, if we do the math, will probably retire somewhere in 2024. I know that's so long away, it doesn't really matter, but I figured we put it in there anyway so you could see the differences between the two. There are significant differences between these two exams. These are not the same thing, but just a little bit different in the newer version. This was not a 20% update to the content. This was a significant update to the content. Only 50% of the information in 501 made it into the 601. Half of it's gone. And the 601 is 30% bigger. So the amount of new content in the 601 exam is, from a content creator's perspective, it's massive change. It's a massive update. So if you are planning to study, and pick whichever one you want to do, I have no vested interest in either. I think the 501 is the better choice for you, which is why I have that link there, why you shouldn't wait for the SY0-601 at professormesser.link/601wait. I think your better chance for earning your certification is to take the 501 before it retires on July the 31st. So that's why I have that there. It really is your best bet, is to take that 501. I realize there are people taking the 601, and that's fine too. We're just starting to see books come out onto the market. This was released in November, but this is normal. When an exam is first released, it takes some time for content to get created because it takes time to create content. So that's a good example of why that is. Whether you take the 501 or 601 exam, it is exactly the same. One exam, 90 minutes long, a maximum of 90 questions. You might get fewer questions than 90 questions. The scoring is exactly the same. So the scoring scale is between 100 and 900. Passing score you get would be a 750. What does that mean? Well, we don't know because CompTIA doesn't share their scoring system. It's not a percentage. It's a set of points. Each question's worth a different number, so we don't know. Just do the best you can and hope you get a 750. That's my advice to you. The exam itself is mostly multiple choice, but there are performance-based questions as well. I have a performance-based question for you today. So that's our overview of the exam. We can mull that over as we are going through some of these things today. The 501 exam, as I mentioned, still available out there. So, of course, all of my study materials are there if you're studying for that exam. My Success Bundle is still available, so an offline version of all my videos, MP3 versions of all of these videos, my course notes, my practice exams, my Exam Hacks ebook, which you can only get with the Success Bundle. It's an ebook I created that talks about the testing process, sort of outside the scope of Security Plus or Network Plus or A Plus. How can you best prepare for the exam? That's what the Exam Hacks ebook is about. You get preferred access to this Q&A. So it's another great feature of the Success Bundle. There's some more things in there as well. You can find out more about the Success Bundle at professormesser.com/501SB. And as soon as we finish the videos for the 601, we'll have a 601 Success Bundle as well. There are also some free questions on my website that are Security Plus questions for the 501. You can find those at professormesser.com/take10. There's also questions there for the A Plus and Network Plus, that type of thing. So that's available for you to go through if you're planning to take that 501. This study group is available on replay on YouTube immediately afterwards. So there's a couple minutes after I hit the stop button. They process it, and then you'll be able to watch it online. I also created a podcast version of this. So if you have a podcast listening program, this will download into your listening program automatically as soon as I post it. And you can find that at professormesser.com/podcast. You can also find the RSS feeds there, or you can just play it from this page. So if you just want to listen in, you can stream it directly from that page and listen to the entire study group. I break them up into the actual study group and then the after show, depending on what you would like to listen to. You've got some choices. About a day after this, you'll find that there will be timestamps in the YouTube video description. These timestamps are created by my marketing manager, Lori, who is listening to this replay right now. Everybody say hi to Lori. Thank you, Lori, for listening in and creating these timestamps. It gives you a place where you can jump directly to questions, directly to answers, find exactly the phone call you heard that you were trying to get more information on. Very useful. So this is one where I think can really help you. And you can go back years now and see these timestamps. And YouTube is even enhancing their player to make these timestamps even better. So there's some nice features there on YouTube if you're watching the video replay. Let's go back to look at the question we asked earlier, which was, which of the following is responsible for enforcing rules during a cybersecurity exercise? Is that the white team, the purple team, the red team, or the blue team? And if we look at your results, 45% of you say that's the white team. 31% said blue team. 17% said purple team. 7% said the red team. It's like Halo. We aren't quite sure which color it's supposed to be. Well, if we're dealing with in the enforcement of rules, in security, you've probably heard about the red team and the blue team before. You might have heard of the purple team, but the white team is the one that's responsible for enforcing those rules, making decisions, determining what the results of these things should be. They are the referee, so to speak. They're the manager of the process. So if you're in the middle of a formal security exercise, these are the folks that will be able to point you in the right direction and say, you did the right thing, or you didn't do the right thing. So it's completely up to them. They're the boss. So the white team is the answer to our question. If you answered A, 45% of you did answer A, white team. That is the right answer. So that also is our rewind question for last month. Hopefully that's something you can remember that we did last month. And if you didn't remember, then now you've learned something new. That definitely is a 601 question. So that might help you as we go through all of these. Let's do another question, but our first new question of the month is not a multiple choice question. Our first new question of the month is a performance-based question. Performance-based questions are related to anything that is not multiple choice. That's how it's really defined. Anything that's not multiple choice. So if there is a fill-in-the-blank question, a question where they put you to a command prompt and ask you to perform a function, a drag-and-drop question, a matching question, a question where you have to put things in a certain order, from highest to lowest, fastest to slowest. You've got some options there. So this performance-based question of the month, this one, for those of you that are listening on the podcast, you probably won't be able to do this one audio-wise. This one involves a picture, but this one is one that hopefully you can step through to figure out the details. So let's step through our performance-based question of the month. The question asks, create firewall rules that would allow encrypted web communication between the management server and the web server, and explicitly block all traffic between the file server and the database server. So this was the question. We want to create firewall rules that would allow encrypted web communication between the management server and the web server, and explicitly block all traffic between the file server and the database server. So you can see on your screen is a network map. I should probably get my big head out of the way so you can actually answer this question. Let's do this. Let's see if I can do this properly. If I hit the right button. There we go. So here you go. You won't see me on this, but at least you can see the picture now. This question again says, I want a firewall rule. You can see there's two rules there in the firewall list in the middle that would allow encrypted web communication between management server and web server, and explicitly block all traffic between the file server and the database server. This is not unlike a question that you might get on the exam, where it's sort of a diagram and they're asking questions about what's in the diagram, or you have to complete different aspects of the diagram. This is one that you should know about. And of course, if you're getting into IT security, understanding how firewall rules work is an important part of that. It certainly helps also if you're looking at the firewall rules. Sometimes you're presented with a list of firewall rules and it says, here's a traffic flow. What happens to this traffic flow in these firewall rules? So this can be very, very helpful for you to step through this. For those of you looking at this picture, I'm going to read out I didn't have enough room to put everything on one screen here. So the question again says, create firewall rules that would allow encrypted web communication between the management server and the web server, and explicitly block all traffic between the file server and the database server. So there you go. This is what we would do. For those of you in the chat room, are CompTIA exams based around Cisco devices? Well, I would not say based around, no. It's not really based around any device. The CompTIA exams are vendor neutral, so you could get questions about Cisco or about Microsoft or about Palo Alto Networks or about Checkpoint or about McAfee or about Symantec or they could be about anything. There's no specific manufacturer that CompTIA would focus on. And most of the questions are relatively generic. So a question like this applies to any firewall. So if you are someone who is working through firewalls, can I pop this up? There it is. So if you're someone who is working with a firewall rules are pretty much the same regardless of what firewall you're on. There's some differences with some of the next-gen firewalls because there's additional capabilities in those firewalls. But this is not a next-gen question. This question is more along the lines of a traditional firewall rule. You can think of it that way, and having those things there. Let's see how you did. Number of you are submitting your answer very slowly. I think we need to step through this one step by step and see if we can decipher what it is we would like out of this question. So here we go. Here's how we would do this. So first, let's look at the picture that is here. Is my database server part of this? It is. So you're not going to see me on this. I'll keep my head out of the way because the database server is up there at the top where this is. So let's step through. How do you know if you got it right? You're about to find out. So here we go. Here is the answer to the question. So create firewall rules that would allow encrypted web communication. We'll start with the first one between the management server. Let me pull up my rules here. There's our rule base. We have to be we have a rule number, and then I need a source IP, a destination IP, a TCP or UDP protocol with the port, and whether we're going to allow or block it. So the first one we want to do is this one, between the management server and the web server. So I've drawn a little arrow on here. So our source is the 10.2.1.47. Our web server is 10.1.1.2. So this is one where you would have to go through. Well, this is one where we can start then with the management server. So our source is 10.2.1.47. We'll move it in here. Our destination should be the web server, 10.1.1.2. And what we want to allow is encrypted web communication. Now, I realize in the Security Plus exam objectives, there are no port numbers listed in there. They are going to assume that in your world of IT security, that you know what the encrypted web port number happens to be. So port numbers are something that you should already have familiar if you're already at this point. So we are looking at port 443. So that's one you're just going to have to remember. You just have to know this from your A+ studies, your Network Plus studies. You probably know it just by using browsers at this point. But that is port 443 is what you want to put into that list. And we wanted to allow this communication. So, of course, we're going to tell a disposition in here to allow this traffic flow. Now, the second part of this question said, explicitly block all traffic between the file server and the database server. Now, in a normal firewall, in most firewalls, and really all firewalls these days, if you put nothing else in this rule base, it's done. You're finished. It's going to block everything after this. If it's not explicitly listed in the rule base, it gets blocked, which makes sense from a security perspective, doesn't it? If you're not telling it to be allowed, it should all be blocked. But this is, as you can see in the question, I asked you to explicitly block all traffic between the file server and database server. I'll explain why we might want to do that in just a moment. So our next step is between the file server and the database server. There's that. We're going the other direction at this point. File server's down here at 10.1.1.3. the database server is 10.2.1.20. So we want to make sure that we're able to put that in there. It's the same process. We'll start with a file server, 10.1.1.3. Our destination is 10.2.1.20 added into the mix. We want to put the protocol in. Well, in this case, we're blocking everything. So the protocol is really both, really any, we call it. And then the port number is any. It's any. This is if you ever talk to a firewall person and you're trying to troubleshoot a problem, and they'll even tell you, well, I set it to any. And then you know, okay, that means you put everything. Everything in there is any. And of course, in this case, it's an explicit block. We are telling the firewall absolutely block. It's what we want to do. So that is our two rules. We will, in rule number 1, our source IP is 10.2.1.47, destination IP 10.1.1.2. The protocol is TCP, port number 443, and we're going to allow that. The second is 10.1.1.3, a destination IP of 10.2.1.20, and then it's any block. So there's a number of questions that have come up about these firewall rules and really firewalls in general. These are firewall questions I think a lot of people are asking about. The first is, and I mentioned this, why are we putting a block in here if by default, really every firewall you're going to run into is going to be able to block implicitly? There's effectively a block at the bottom you never see that blocks everything that wasn't part of the firewall rules. Most of the reasons for this, and I have customers or people that I've worked with in the past have done many things this way. Maybe, and this is usually the way, an implicit block is rarely, if ever, logged. You just don't log them because it would just be logging everything. Everything that was blocked, it would be logging. Can you imagine a log full of all of these blocks? It would just be massive. So most firewalls, if it is an implicit block, if you don't have a firewall rule, it doesn't get logged. It's effectively what that means. So some people, though, say, especially some very smart security people say, yeah, but I want to see if anybody ever tries to do this. If anybody ever tries to communicate between those two devices, I want that in my log. That's important to us. There may be many reasons why that would be important. But that's important to us, and I want it to be in the log. So I'm going to create a firewall rule that explicitly blocks it so that if it is blocked, it goes into the log. And now later on, a month from now, a year from now, if I need to go back and either prove or disprove there was communication between those two devices, it's in my log. I can see all of it. So that's why we would want to create an explicit block. I've had some people I've set up firewalls for said at the bottom of the rule base, put source IP any, destination IP any, protocol any, port number any, block. They wanted to log every single block to their firewall. And there may be very good reasons to do that as well. This was a federal government facility. So they really wanted to see everything that wasn't allowed, they wanted logged. And they kept that log. It was a massive log. So when you do that, of course, there's a number of things you have to do on the back end to make sure you have enough storage space, to make sure your logs are able to be stored, to make sure you're offloading that to a SIM, that the SIM has enough storage space. There's all these things that happen. But if you engineer it properly, you can absolutely do that. Makes perfect sense. And that's one of the reasons you would make that happen. Another question in the chat room was, why did we only block it in one direction or allow it in one direction? That's the beauty of a stateful firewall. Every firewall you're going to run into is a stateful firewall. I realize in the exam content that we get an understanding. There's a description of stateful versus not stateful. And it's important you understand the differences. But a stateful firewall will allow traffic going this direction because that was the rule we wanted. The rule was that we wanted to allow encrypted web communication between the management server and web server. We didn't care about the other direction where it started. But when you have this rule set up that would allow it, when that first goes out between those two, let's bring up our traffic flow for this one. There's the traffic flow between the, did I want to go to the management? There it is. So between the management server and the web server, when the management server sends this traffic to the web server, the firewall allows it, and then it makes a note saying, hey, that management server just sent some traffic to the web server. Let me create an item in my state, in the state log, in a state entry. It's usually in memory. But it logs the fact that this management server started a communication with the web server. And now that it knows the state of that conversation, it also recognizes the web server is going to have to respond back to the management server. And because there was already an outbound message to that server that was allowed, we will also allow the response. So that's the beauty of a stateful firewall. It remembers the state, and we don't have to create yet another rule that allowed the traffic going the other direction. And in fact, the state that it allows is just that session. It just doesn't allow all traffic from the web server to go back to the management server. If we're communicating to that web server over a particular port number, it has to send the traffic back over that port number. It's only going to allow the traffic back over that port number. So that's why we don't have to put multiple rules in our rule base. It makes the rule base much simpler to understand. It makes the firewall much simpler to use. And it makes perfect sense that way. Because if you're going to communicate to a device and that's allowed, well, wouldn't you want the conversation to come back to you? Shouldn't that also be allowed? In some firewalls, you can turn that feature off. You can turn off the stateful capability. And you would have to put in a rule that allowed the conversation the other direction. So that's one where this becomes pretty important to know the sort of the nuances of working with these firewalls. And that's why those two rules are in here. And that's why we only needed 2 rules in this list because of that. So hopefully you were able to get those rules. There were a few curveballs in here. The curveballs with the port numbers is important. Sort of the broad understanding of the Security Plus exam is that you already know these port numbers. There are literally 0 port numbers listed in the exam objectives. So you will probably be expected to know what web traffic uses for port numbers. There's probably a couple of others. I wouldn't worry too much over that for the exam, but it is something that you may run into, especially with a performance-based question like this. So hopefully you were able to enjoy that performance-based question. I know that was a big one. We don't usually do performance-based questions and go into this level of detail, but hopefully this would be a useful way to do this. The block that we have for the chat room, people say, why didn't we drop the packets? Well, in this firewall, block is effectively the same thing as a drop. It drops it on the floor. Block and drop are effectively the same thing. Different firewalls use a different nomenclature depending on what they like to use. The firewall I used to use had allow and block, so that's what I use in here. You may find one that says drop. In fact, if you're using Linux, some of the Linux firewalls use the drop term to drop the packets on the floor. Same thing, same process. The packets don't go through. That's the important part of that. You know, they're not physically dropped, right? Hopefully you did pretty well with this. And if you didn't, now you know a little bit more about how firewalls work and how these firewall rules work. And that can certainly be something you need to do. Who sweeps them up? You do, because you're the one with the IT security professional certification. So they're going to give you a broom, and you're the one who's going to have to sweep up all of those packets all over the floor. Absolutely. Let's see. Let's now move on. We're going to go past performance-based questions. And by the way, performance-based questions, I do a new performance-based question every month. I kind of recycle the topics every year, but I do change the content of the questions. So you can go back over the last 12 months to every single Security Plus study group, and you will see a performance-based question there. And sometimes I mix them up, do some new ones. So you never know what you're going to find there. But that is our performance-based question for February. Thanks for playing along with that. Let's do another question. Now we're back to multiple choice, like the most of your exam is going to be. This multiple choice question asks, which of the following would be the best way to provide connectivity to VPCs? Would that be a transit gateway, a containerization manager, function as a service, or rapid elasticity? Which of the following would be the best way to provide connectivity to VPCs? Would that be a transit gateway, a containerization manager? Would it be function as a service, or would it be rapid elasticity? If you think you know the answer, go to professormesser.com/QA. Please no answers in the chat room. Please lock in your answer at professormesser.com/QA. How many performance-based questions will there be on the exam? Usually a handful. So this is one of those cases where this is usually, you can think about 5. Sometimes there's more, sometimes there's fewer, but that's about right on the exam. So that's a good thing to at least know about. And this is, as many people are wondering, these questions seem to be very focused on the 601 exam. Yes, you have reached the SY0-601 study group. So all of these questions will be based on the 601 exam. And this is one of those times where you do have to, if you don't know what the topic of the question is, then it becomes very difficult to answer the question. So maybe random question. We just guess what that's going to be. For those of you looking for 501 specific questions, I have 3.5 years of 501 videos you can go back and watch that are all 501 questions. They're all on my website under the SY0-501 study group. So you can go back and look at all of those. But we're now on to the newer exam. I know I tell you, it's sort of a mixed message. I tell you should be taking the 501 exam, and then I give you a 601 study group. But we have to start the new study groups at some point, and some of this will overlap, by the way. As I mentioned, 50% of the 501 exam does show up in the 601 exam. So this is one where we do have to kind of mix them up a little bit. Let's see how you did with this one. The question asked, which of the following would be the best way to provide connectivity to VPCs? So this is one where knowing these new topics is going to be pretty important as you step through this. This is definitely a 601 question. This is not a 501 question. So this is specific. The terms that we have in here are 601 type questions. Let me see if I can make this a little bit better on the screen so we can all see it. So the question asks, which of the following would be the best way to provide connectivity to VPCs? Would that be a transit gateway? Would it be containerization manager? Would it be function as a service? Or would it be rapid elasticity? So let's have a look at what you believe the answer to be. The results are, we're a little torn, but 41%, we go not a majority, but a plurality of you have said transit gateway. 33% of you, a third of you, say containerization manager, which sounds great. 15% say function as a service, and 11% say rapid elasticity. So as many people are realizing, they have stumbled into the SY0-601 study group. This is a 601 specific question. This is not a question you will find on your 501, but this does help you if you're somebody who's working through those 601 questions. And of course, if you're studying for 501, you of course learn something along the way. VPC stands for Virtual Private Cloud. VPC, this is a cloud. There's a lot more cloud on the 601 than there was in the 501, for better or for worse. There is, of course, a huge emphasis in cloud technology. And as a IT security professional, you're going to need to play along in that game as well. Probably much, much more than you have in the past. If you're pooling together a grouping of resources, these virtual resources in the cloud, you need to put them somewhere. And the where we put them is the virtual private cloud. This is a challenge, though, is that you're probably, especially you folks that are managing cloud-based services, are going to find that in many environments, you have more than one VPC. You probably have multiple VPCs, many different groups, many different application instances. Maybe you're separating them out by project. You can create and build out VPCs in different companies. You may be managing clouds, some clouds in the Microsoft cloud, in the Rackspace cloud, and in the Amazon cloud all at the same time. So that's a good example of having to do all of that. The problem is, how do you connect into any of this? It's all in the cloud. I need some way to securely connect myself and my customers to these VPCs, and I need some way to manage the communications process. Well, what you need is a transit gateway. You need, that's the term that we use there. I have an idea right here in the middle, is that transit gateway, that once you arrive into the cloud, how do you then get to the VPCs? And it's through that transit gateway. The way that we would normally do this is at the customer site, at your site, wherever people are connecting, they're usually connecting into the transit gateway using a VPN. That's a common way to do it. If this is a public cloud, it's very different. You don't need the VPN, but then again, these wouldn't be private clouds either. But this is one where the clouds are private. You can't get to these clouds from the outside. There's no access to these clouds from the internet. So you have to perhaps use an IPsec tunnel from a router that's at your site, or you connect via a IPsec or VPN-based client on your computer that connects into the transit gateway. And once you're connecting to that transit gateway, you can gain access to all of those VPCs, which very often are on different IP subnets for you networking folks. Becomes useful to have that there. So this is pretty much the normal architecture. There are nuances associated with that, but this is the architecture that you will find if you are building out some private clouds at a third-party cloud provider and giving that connectivity. The transit gateway is one of those terms you need to know, and that was the correct answer. In this case, the 42% of you that answered transit gateway got that one absolutely right. 32% of you said a containerization manager. That containerization manager is a real thing, especially if you're doing container-based application instances. That's another set of topics on the 601 exam that you won't find on the 501. But the containerization manager is one that allows you to manage the process of building and tearing down those containers for your application instances. It doesn't really help you with connectivity to VPCs, however. We have 15% of you function as a service, yet another cloud type technology that you need to be familiar with on the 601 exam. Function as a service is a way to manage access and usability of these application instances. In this case, 15% of you chose that, but not the correct answer. Function as a service. It doesn't have anything to do with VPCs, or at least not the management and connectivity to VPCs. And lastly, 11% rapid elasticity, which describes the ability to increase or decrease resources behind the scenes. Very cloud-based topic. Very useful for scalability, but really doesn't help you with actual connectivity to a virtual private cloud. So that is the idea behind these, is that, and as you can see here, a lot of cloud technologies and application technologies on the 601 exam. In this case, we were looking for transit gateway, and if you answered A, 42% of you got that one absolutely right. Well done. This is hopefully one you'll be able to be a little more familiar with as we go through these questions. I have another 601 question for those of you in the chat room who have now figured out you're on the 601 study group. I have another 601 question that will confound you. This 601 question asks, which of the following would be the best way to monitor a cloud-based microservice architecture? Whatever that is. Would it be an IPS? Would it be SNMP traps? Would it be IPsec? Or would it be API inspection? Which of the following would be the best way to monitor a cloud-based microservice architecture? Is it IPS, SNMP traps, IPsec, or API inspection? If you think you know the answer, lock in your answer, professormesser.com/QA. QA. I would not say that the 601 questions are more difficult than the 501 questions, but the topics are certainly broader. As I mentioned, the exam is 30% larger. This is one of the reasons the exam is 30% larger because of this. So there's a huge number of topics you have to know for the 601 exam. And as I said earlier in the pre-show, I don't think the difficulty level of the 601 is more difficult, but because you have to know so much more, it's a harder exam to study for. You have to know more, so it's harder. I guess that makes sense, doesn't it? 30% harder than the 501. We'll talk about specifics around how many objectives that is in the after show if you'd like to. It's in my video as well, where I break down exactly how many objectives and what the differences are between all of those. I'll be glad to go through that in the after show. If you stick around, just remind me in the chat room as we're doing that. Hey, weren't you going to talk about objectives in the 601? Maybe I'll remember. We'll find out. This is a good one because it talks about one of those new topics on the 601 exam, which is microservice architectures. Let's see how you did. Which of the following would be the best way to monitor a cloud-based microservice architecture? Would it be an IPS, an SNMP trap, IPsec, or API inspection? 49% of you, 50 now, say API inspection. We'll say that's a majority. 26% said, I'll use SNMP traps, thank you very much. 13% said an IPS, and 11% said IPsec. That's what you would use. Microservice architectures, it's the new thing. It's the latest stuff. It's the way that application developers are creating these apps. You know, we used to create apps where you would sit down, you would write 1 million lines of code, and you would compile all that code together, and you've got an application. And if you ever need to change anything with that application, you have to go back into that 1 million lines of code. You have to change the thing you were going to change. Maybe it was a misspelling. You have to compile the entire thing again. And then you have to publish it as one big application. Well, we've realized there's some much better ways to do this. What if you could break the application up into little pieces so that there was an inventory piece, there's a login piece, there's a report writing piece, there's all these little pieces in the middle of the app. And we could do that. We call these microservices, so that you could have a part of the application running. And if you need to change or update part of the app, you can update that microservice without changing any other services associated with that application. It sort of makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Well, now with cloud-based technologies, you're really able to do this. So there might be a single database or multiple databases that are used by these microservices, but how do you get a client screen that's really one screen to somehow talk to the right microservice? You need something in the middle. And that something in the middle is an application programming interface gateway. An API gateway is the best way to do this. It is one that really allows you to manage the communication between the clients and the microservice, and ultimately the data. For those of us that are dealing with security, protection of the data is so incredibly important. So having that gateway there not only gives us the ability to forward information to the correct microservice, now we can start putting some security policies on this API gateway. Maybe we're only going to let certain people from certain areas of the world access certain microservices. Maybe we want to see if anybody's trying to do some fuzzing and we're noticing a lot of weird requests coming in to these microservices. We can block it at the API gateway. So nothing that is unusual makes it past our gateway. It is the sort of the security middleman as well as the application enablement piece of this. And of course, since we're at the gateway, we can monitor it. How many people are making queries? What do those queries look like? Do we see multiple queries from multiple people? Do we see a large number of queries from one person? So we can start narrowing down where some suspicious activity might be. This is a very useful way to manage applications. It's a useful way to create applications and manage them and secure them. So that's the API inspection and the API integration. So if you answered API inspection, that was the right answer. 53% of you chose API inspection. 25% said SNMP traps, and that is certainly a way to manage devices. Traditionally, that's how we've done it with SNMP traps. But this question asked about the best way to monitor cloud-based microservice architectures. And although SNMP could be used here, because those databases, the microservices themselves might have the ability to send SNMP information, but we were really looking for the best option for cloud-based microservices. And in this case, API inspection is just a better answer. 13% of you said an IPS, intrusion prevention system. IPS is not really, it's sort of that old school looking for a signature coming through. And if the signature matches, we know it's a known vulnerability. But we just talked about somebody fuzzing the API gateway. That's not going to match any of our signatures in our IPS. So probably not the best choice for a cloud-based microservice architecture. An IPsec is an encryption tunnel, usually an encrypted tunnel. Most commonly, an encrypted tunnel doesn't have anything to do with monitoring any type of architecture, much less a cloud-based microservice architecture. So not the best choice there either. The best choice was the one 53% of you chose, which was API inspection. If you're watching this video for continuing education unit credit, and if you have no idea what I'm talking about, then this doesn't apply to you. But if you are watching this for API or for API credit, Maybe you are watching it for API credit. You're watching it for CEU credit. You can, of course, follow these instructions to receive an email from me that has that certification in it. What you want to do is go to the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website, click the Contact Us link, and in that form, put your name, your email address. Put in the subject line, this is the February 2021 Security Plus Study Group. And in the body of the message, put the super secret code word of the month, API inspection. That is our super secret code word of the month, API inspection. Then, of course, if you want to put anything else in that message as well, you're more than welcome to. I read through every single one of them. They all come to me, and I process them manually. So it takes me about a week to get them to you. And although I'm not able to reply back to every single one of these, I absolutely read through every single one that you send me. So that's another thing that you can do. And then about a week, I'll send you back an email that is digitally signed, which says you must have watched this. Here is your 1 credit hour of a CEU that is in the webinar category. So it's very specific how CompTIA does that. So that's your process. Hopefully that I look forward to your letters, your cards and letters for this. Let's do another one in our list. Is this question? Here's a question that would apply for all of you studying for the 501. I've got a question for you that applies to the 501 as well. How about that? Here's a question that asks, which of the following would be the best method of sending data to a specific port number on a remote device? Would that be traceroute, netcat, dig, or route? Which of the following would be the best method of sending data to a specific port number on a remote device? Would that be traceroute, netcat, dig, or route? Oh, it feels so good to have a question that applies back to the old exam, doesn't it? Well, if you know the answer, you can answer it right here at professormesser.com/QA. That's the way you would do it. And this is one where no questions in the chat room, no hints in the chat room. And in fact, this question is written as people are mentioning in the chat room. But wait, I would use a different way than you've put into this question. And in fact, I probably would too, but that wasn't the question. CompTIA does this all the time. They might take the question that, or the answer that you is most common, or the one that you would think is most common, and they don't put it there. And the reason they don't is because they want you, of course, to be able to answer based on which of the following. Perhaps the one that I would use, perhaps the one that you would use, not available on the system. Maybe it's not even installed. Maybe the system's not connected to the internet and you can't simply install things. You can't do an apt-get. You can't yum things on this machine. You can't set up things willy-nilly on this machine. You have to use what's in front of you. It's a closed system, and the thing that you would use is not available. The only choices you have are traceroute, netcat, dig, and route. And I got to tell you, that's pretty real world. I have been in a lot of environments where people are doing a lot of things. And this is one, of course, where you really should, as you go through this, you really should be familiar with all of these different options. And of course, they are part of the exam objectives. So you absolutely need to know that too, whenever you're working through it. See if you happen to know this one. This is a very common thing. I've been in client environments where, sorry, that's not available on this machine. You have to just use what's available to you. Can't install a program. Nope, we're locked down. You can't do that without going through the change control committee. That's normal world. So see if you can break through all of those options. Go to professormesser.com/QA, lock in your option there as well. So hopefully you're familiar with these things. All 4 of these, by the way, are both in the 501 exam objectives and the 601 exam objectives. So you need to know all of the things that are listed as possible answers. And trust me, it's just a subset. In fact, they went a little crazy on the 601. You think the 501 had a lot of things in the command line, a lot of utilities to know? Oh, wait till you get to the 601. Oh, it's nothing. The 501 is easy compared to what you're going to need to know on the 601. They went crazy with stuff. It's just delightful. It's amazing, the stuff they put onto that one. But I got to be fair, everything they put in the 601, all good stuff. It's all accurate, good things to know. It's just a lot. It's just many there. How many CEUs are required to maintain your cert? Is it 50? And I think you can only get 10 webinar category CEUs, something like that. I think that's the right number. The right answer is out on the CompTIA website, obviously. They list everything there. Let's see how you did. The question again, which of the following would be the best method of sending data to a specific port number on a remote device? Would that be traceroute, netcat, dig, or route? And we have 51% of us that say it's netcat. We have 12% that say it's traceroute. We have 24% said route and 13% said dig. I did that in the wrong order, but you get the idea. 24% said route. It's almost a quarter, and then sort of a two-way tie for third there between traceroute and dig. Well, in this case, the 50% of us that said netcat is probably where we would kind of focus our efforts. Indeed, netcat is a great way to do this. This is how you would read or write information to the network. You can open a port, send some data, receive some data. You're sort of got a lot of flexibility with how you're sending information over the network, and netcat gives you the ability to listen on a port number, to transfer data, to scan ports, to send information across the network to another port. Very, very flexible to have this here. If you want to create a backdoor in a system, netcat will do that for you. You can pop open and create an open port and then send data into it. Very useful to have that. And it's some options there. If you're running Windows, for example, you may not have a netcat, but there may be an ncat or something else you can run. There are versions of this available in many different operating systems with different capabilities. Microsoft Windows does not allow you to do certain things with port numbers and available sockets, but you can do this on Mac OS and Linux, for example, much easier. So it just depends what you want to do for those. But netcat is the right answer. That's the one you want to focus on. In fact, 51% of you say B, netcat. That was the right answer. 24% of you said route. Route is a great way to see what routes a particular device is going to use, or to even add or remove routes from a routing table, but it doesn't really help you send information to a specific port number on a remote device. One thing that would qualify is traceroute. Traceroute can use certain protocols that are specific to a TCP, UDP, and certain port numbers. I know traceroute commonly uses ICMP, so you don't commonly think of it as a port number sort of device, but the message that is sent out via traceroute, which we are changing the time to live on, can be anything. It can be any port number. It can be any protocol. What we're really looking to see is the ICMP message that is being sent back, if at all possible. But that is not a great way of sending data to a specific port number on a remote device. From all the options that are here, that is really not even close to being the best one in this list. So this is one of those, and very common to see, that multiple answers could technically be correct, except for that term best. And that's where we really have to know how this would work. And then lastly, dig. Dig is a nice utility that allows you to query name servers. It's not used at all for sending data to a specific port number on a remote device. The only one that makes any sense here, or the best sense, is netcat, 51%. Very useful utility, very flexible utility. If you've never used it before, that could be something you may want to have a look at. It could be really useful. Well, as you've already seen on the 601 exam, it's a big exam. There's a bunch of new topics. To give you an idea how big it is, I created course notes for this, for all 176 videos that will eventually be posted. But the course notes are done already. I write my entire course first. I create the course notes first, and then I start shooting the videos. So there's things in here that you haven't even seen yet, and yet you could get the course notes and you'd be able to see what's coming in those videos right now. This set of notes, how many pages? Let me lift my glasses up so I can actually read. 120 pages. Probably have it on the screen, right? I was correct. I have verified that it is 120 pages. That's big. It got really large because it is big, but it's also available in digital form. That's the physical form that I have here in the course notes, and it covers everything from the exam. So if somebody like you wanted to kind of not have to read or watch through all of these videos and have to take your own notes, Can you imagine going through 176 videos and writing down notes for all 176 videos? Why would you do that? Why did I throw this on the floor? You should do it. You should just grab the course notes. It's all in here. In fact, I have it. Why am I showing you on this little box on the screen? I have it on my screen so that you can see it. Here they are, the course notes. It's big. So all of the diagrams, all of the text, all of the details from my course, they're in here. So everything is in the course notes. This is a great way to summarize everything. And I think it's a great summary you can take along with you. It's a PDF file. You can put it on all your mobile devices. You can put it on your computer at home. If you want a printed version, you can purchase the printed version. And if you purchase the printed version, I send you the digital version for free. So as soon as you buy the printed version, you can get that digital version downloaded immediately. You can find all this on my website, professormesser.com/601cn for 601 course notes. And a great way to support the site too. For those of you that are wanting to support the site, I want you to get something in return. You'll notice I don't really take donations, or I have not traditionally taken donations. I prefer you getting something for your money, and I think this is a great trade. It's a great way to summarize this information you need for your exam. So it might help you out too. Let's shift gears back to a 601 question since we're talking about it. The 601, sorry 501 people, but this 601 question asks, which security framework is mandatory for U.S. federal agencies and includes a 6-step process? Now, if you are someone that you're working through the details of this exam and you've never seen this before in the 601, then you're just going to take a guess at this one, I guess. The options are a NIST RMF, an SSAE SOC 2 Type 1 and 2, a CSA CCM, or a CIS CSC. All four of those things that sound like I just made them up are real things. Thank you, federal agencies, for your abbreviations. So this is one of those questions where this could be difficult if you've never stepped into these before. Which security framework is mandatory for U.S. federal agencies and includes a 6-step process? Is it a NIST RMF? Is it the SSAE SOC 2 Type 1 and 2? Is it CSA CCM? Or is it CIS CSC? Nope, didn't make them up. They're real. Those are real things. Real stuff. You need to know them even better. You have to be able to recognize these for your exam. This is I've been a little bit. You notice I've been a little bit very, very specific about some of the things you'll see on this exam. This is one of those things, though, that I have no idea why you would need to know this for Security Plus. Probably a later exam, maybe the CISA, maybe. But who knows? This is one of those questions where if you're in the federal government, you probably know this one cold because you have to work with it all the time. If you're not in the federal government, this is just a bunch of letters thrown together. And in fact, it doesn't even concern you for the most part. The problem, though, if you start saying that about some of these topics on the exam, these are actually a good thing to know. The things that these acronyms dealing with, these security frameworks, are actually valuable security frameworks. So beyond the scope of, wow, this is a lot of stuff and a lot of acronyms, and is it incredibly necessary or does it apply Security Plus? In the very broad IT security sense, these are good things to know about. So I think that's the approach they really took with Security Plus. To their detriment, maybe? We'll see. They made it big, made it large. Well, thank you, Watch, for telling me that something is going on in my life. Let's see how you did with this one. Oh, I can't wait to see. Let's go through this one. Let's get finished with this one, shall we? Which security framework is mandatory for U.S. federal agencies and includes a 6-step process? 53% of you said it's the NIST RMF. 19% say it's the CIS CSC. 15% said the SSAE SOC 2 Type 1 and 2. And 13% said the CSA CCM. All real frameworks, all listed in the Security Plus exam objectives. 53% said NIST RMF. For those of us that are not in federal agencies, we're going with that. We're going to trust our federal agency friends who are on the call, who are watching this. And yes, we found out that this is the NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology Risk Management Framework, the RMF. And it is indeed mandatory for U.S. federal agencies, and there's a 6-step process for this framework. You have to categorize the environment, select the controls, implement the controls, assess if the controls are working, authorize make a decision to authorize the systems, and then lastly, monitor them for ongoing compliance. That is the framework that every federal agency in the United States has to follow. It's pretty, like I said, that is a valid framework. It is extensive. It is well written. I've read through all of these frameworks, so you don't have to, or maybe you do have to. But it is a fine way to set up a structured format for all of your security requirements in the organization. So another one of those examples of things you need to know for the exam. I realize we're at the top of the hour, but I want to get one more question in because that performance-based question took a lot of time. And for those of you who are here for 501 questions, let's end on a question that applies to both exams, both the 501 and the 601, shall we? Here is the question, and it asks, which of these threat actors would be motivated by social change and would likely have limited funding options? Would that be a nation state, a shadow IT, a competitor, or a hacktivist? Which of these threat actors would be motivated by social change and would likely have limited funding options? Is that a nation state, a shadow IT, a competitor, or a hacktivist? I'm saying for those of you in the podcast, hacktivist with a H at the beginning, a hacktivist. For this, if you think you know the answer, go to professormesser.com/QA and lock in your answer. Have you fill those in for what we are doing here. Should be something we break down. Oh, is there another one there? Oh, yes, there is. E is organized crime. Thank you. I did one with 5 answers. I usually do the 5 answers. And for some reason, I didn't on the others, but now I do. So I did all of this. So we have nation state, shadow IT, competitor, hacktivist, and organized crime for these, being able to make that happen. Let's see if you happen to know the answers and breaking these down. I almost missed the most important one on the list, is answer E. You have to have all 5 of them to have a good set of questions, a good set of answers. On your exam, you may get some questions that have 5 answers on them. Most of the answers are probably going to be 4. But that works whenever you start working through these. So we'll have to work through some of these answers too. See if you figure out what these happen to be. Now, for those of you that are new to this exam, that you've never sort of worked through these before, some of these questions may be very familiar to you. But if you've never worked with CompTIA, you may also find that some of this is something you've never seen before. So that's an example of what you would run into. Which of these threat actors would be motivated by social change and would likely have limited funding options? Let's see how we did with this one. Between nation state, shadow IT, competitor, hacktivist, and organized crime, we have 89% of you that say it's the hacktivist in us that is trying to create that social change. I think of all of the threat actors in this list, that's probably the process of elimination kind of ends on that one almost every time, to have that there. It's a hacker who has an idea of really what they want to do. They have goals, they have objectives, they have things that are going to take over the world with their social change, their political agenda, their need to do something that they feel very strongly about. And they are going to sometimes work with an external organization to make that happen. This is in some cases some smart folks who really know what they're doing and have a lot of tools available. What they usually don't have, though, is a lot of money, especially relative to the other threat actors that were in that list. You need some money to be able, to eat and stuff. This is the most important part of this, and a hacktivist does not always have that flexibility, that luxury, if you will. But if you look at these others, you can kind of break these two things down. A nation state has tons of money. That's not their issue. Shadow IT, most of the reasons they are a shadow IT is that they have money. So they were able to buy their own equipment and go around the IT department. That's not the issue. A competitor very often has plenty of money. And organized crime, that's nothing but money. That's why they exist. So if you just looked at the money side of this, you would be able to get rid of all the others, and hacktivist would be the right answer on this case as well. That's one of those situations where you can almost take portions of the question that's being asked and break it down from there, and maybe that can help you. Some of the things you're doing. Let's, well, this is one, by the way, these questions, for those of you that have not looked at the SY0-601 exam objectives, make sure you do that. If nothing else, you've learned today that more than half of the exam is brand new. That's so many new topics on this exam. So make sure you get the exam objectives. They are free. They are available on the CompTIA website. I have a link to those exam objectives on my site. If you go to professormesser.com/objectives, or you can, of course, go to the Google machine, type in CompTIA exam objectives. That'll get you there as well. Either one of those works. And it's incredibly important. There's tons of great information in those exam objectives. They should be the first thing you use in your studies. They should be the last thing you reference before going into the exam. They will tell you if you have memorized everything you need to memorize. And there's a lot to memorize, more important than ever. We do one of these study groups every month. We've come to the end of the study groups for February, but next week we start up again. On the 2nd and the 4th, we have some A+ study groups. Our next Network Plus study group is on the 25th of March. Our next Security Plus study group way down here on the 30th. Got to wait that long for another Security Plus study group? I know. My world is weird right now. I got a lot of stuff going on. So that's one of those situations where you'll be able to join us on the 30th. And of course, I'm always around online. You can always send me a message on my website, on Twitter, Facebook, on LinkedIn, whatever it happens to be. But these dates also can change. So this is one of those where always keep checking back. You will see that I keep my calendar online always updated. That link is professormesser.com/calendar to get you there. So make sure you're always checking back on when that happens to be. For those of you taking the 501 exam, I haven't forgotten about you. I also have course notes for the 501 exam. So make sure you have a look on my website, the 501 course notes. Plenty to see there. The 501 exam, you actually have some advantages because I have my practice exams available for the 501. So this is a big book. It's like 300 pages of questions and answers. So be sure to check the Q&A on my website. Plenty there and how we work through it. That's all on the website. Find it at professormesser.com. Well, we've gone through an hour of Q&A. Can you believe it? Stick around for the after show, though, because you can ask me questions now about Q&A in the after show. I'll open up phone lines, and you can put questions into the chat room. I'm far from leaving. We're not done yet. But, of course, I still have those weekly questions available on Twitter and Instagram. You can find it at professormesser.com/Twitter, professormesser.com/Instagram. Of course, you've got all of these new videos coming out for the 601. If you would like to be informed the second I put it online, then you should subscribe to my YouTube channel, professormesser.com/YouTube. Hit the bell, smash the button, as the kids say, to be able to know when those are released. And don't forget about Security Plus course notes and the exams for the 501 and 601. There's links on the website at professormesser.com. Stick around for the after show. Thank you for joining us for this first study group, the first hour of this study group. We've got more to come, and we will see you on the other side. See you next time on the SY0-601 Security Plus study group. All right, here we go on the other side. Let's get some things up and running. See, there's a lot of new stuff on the 601. Some of it a little bit crazy. But I can talk a little smack about the 601. You won't hear a lot of other people doing that. I say when things are good and I say when things are bad. I like to give you a good balance between those two things. But I am not a CompTIA partner, so I can criticize without concern. And I'll tell you that if you're planning to take the 501 or 601, I would take the 501 right now. So much easier to have that happen. If you'll bear with me a moment, I'll get the phone lines up and running, and we'll be able to get there for this. If you're ever in this situation, if you hold on just a moment, I will get my Skype up and running. Here we go. There's nobody here doing this for me, so I have to call into my own phone lines, and then I'll give you information on how you can do the same thing. I'll type in my secret code into this thing here, and the nice lady says,
your 6-digit PIN.
All right. I'll put in my 6-digit PIN, and the nice lady says,
Welcome, Professor Messer.
Thanks, nice lady. Well, that means that you can join us as well. It's a toll-free number in the continental United States. You can join us at 855-785-7545. That's 855-785-RJ45. You can also call anywhere in the world in Skype. Skype allows you to call toll-free numbers without any Skype minutes, so it's free. And if you do that, you put a +1 at the beginning. That's the country code for U.S. +1, 855-785-7545 gets you to exactly the same place for those as well. So this is one where, for those of you asking, the SY0-501 expires on July the 31st, all the way through the end of July. So if you are planning to take the 501 exam, you should do the math. If you're someone who can take an exam in 3 to 4 months and you're through it and finished, then stick with the 501. If you are someone like me that takes 6 months to get through an exam, you may have to make a tough decision about taking the 501 or the 601. So that's the situation you'll find yourself in that particular case. When does Network Plus retire? Well, if Network Plus is the new one's due to be released in September, so probably March of 2022. So this time next year is probably about right for Network Plus. We'll see. We don't know for sure, but I think that's a pretty good estimate of when that might be for those of you that are working on your Network Plus exam. I mentioned in the show, and earlier in the main part of the show, that I would talk to you about the different objectives and what's expected on the 501 versus the 601. So I have a list of all of the objectives on the 601, and I've counted through all of them. So let me give you the stats for those of you wondering. So on the 501 exam, if you were to go into the exam objectives and you were to count all of the individual objectives, which is what I do because I'm creating video content for each one of those, there were 778 objectives, which is a pretty good number. That's a little bigger than Network Plus. It's not as big as the 2A pluses combined, but that's a big exam. 501's a big exam, no question. And the topics on the 501 exam are very detailed in some cases. So 778. On the 601 exam, that number goes to 1,038 objectives. It is big set of objectives. So that one's pretty large. That's an increase of 33.42%. Yeah, I did it to 2 decimal places. 33.42%. So 33% larger, the third larger. It's a big exam. 778 was a big exam. This is a really big exam, 1,038. Of the objectives, there are 529 of those are brand new objectives that were not found in the 501. So 50.96% of the exam, brand new topics. 50.96. So when I tell people, don't go take the 601 exam, go take the 501 exam, you're going to be much better off. It's going to be a much easier experience for you. There's much more content available to study from. And at the end of it, it's exactly the same cert. That's what I mean when I say that. Like, those are big numbers. That's a lot that you are going to have to remember. Yeah, where will this end? You keep going with this, the next one's going to have a lot more. So, also in the chat room, when will the practice exams for the 601 be available? As soon as I finish the videos, I'll be writing practice exams for that and updating that as well. Do I think the content is better in the 601? No, it's different. It's not much better. If anything, it's becoming so broad that it doesn't apply to anybody's job anymore. That's kind of what it is. If you're in IT doing security, your role is going to be focused on a number of different things, but there's no way your role could be focused on anything this broad. So they're sort of creating a certification that would apply to everybody. But the problem is that it applies to nobody. It just applies to every possible scenario. It's a blanket that will cover everything. But it's all good content. So that's the trade-off I have, is that it doesn't apply to anything you'll be, to one particular person. It's so broad. But all the content in there really is good content. So that's the issue with this. It's more than a mile wide. It's 10 miles wide now and an inch deep. That's the difference. The challenge with that anyway. Let's are there any other names updated on the 501 and 601? Yeah, they updated like 10 different topics. Nothing too crazy. They did change. The only thing that's probably outside the scope of crazy is the man trap. There's no man trap anymore. We got rid of man trap. They don't exist anymore. It's an access control vestibule. That was the only weird one, I think. Everything else pretty much, but actually describes it better. Access control vestibule actually describes what it is now. So if anything, we've kind of gotten rid of the dumb names and kind of put names in there that make sense for this. So I guess that works for me too. Let's go to the phone lines. We'll go to 954 here in Florida. Hi, caller. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
How you doing, Professor Messer? This is Kevin from Pembroke Pines.
Hey, Kevin, from Pines Boulevard, from Silver Lakes, from down there in Miramar. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. Thank God I took the 501 instead of the 601. Thank God. Because I was lost. The question you just asked right now, like these new acronyms and nomenclature, I was real lost. And I'm like, I even bought the 601 study guide just in case, any question. I just took the 501 on February 2nd, and I passed it. And thank God took that. I was thinking, like, should I take the 601? I was like, nah, I heard what you said about it. It's such a leap from the 501. I'm like, nah, I shouldn't really do that because, wow, you caught me off guard this session. I mean, I was really caught off guard. I'm like, man, I'm glad I will fail this.
Well, we say this, and I think a lot of this, of course, is that it's new content, and it's sort of new to all of us, and we're all sort of learning it for the first time. We're all sort of seeing it for the first time. I wonder, like a year from now, we'll be like, oh, yeah, I know that. I've already heard that before. It's probably going to be commonplace. I think it's more of the change is the thing that may even be more dramatic rather than the content we have to learn. But you're not wrong. It's so much more content. I'm glad you were able to get through it as well.
Yeah, and matter of fact, let me put out a PSA to anyone out there. I took it online, and if anybody decides to take that test online, if you take it, make sure you're using a residential account, not a business account, because I have Comcast Business, and I was taking it online, and even I disabled the firewall, the test wouldn't go through.
Really?
And I had it on the proctor. Yeah, I disabled the firewall altogether, and it still wouldn't go through. And basically, I had to retake the test like 2 times. And the proctor, they didn't really know what they was doing and stuff like that. And I had to go back and forth between Pearson and CompTIA and get a new voucher and everything. So I just went into the other side of my house and which have residential internet, and I was able to get through.
Okay.
It's been fine.
This is one of those challenges whenever you're doing anything from home on the internet, especially this one, because they lock down so much of your computer and it can only communicate in a certain way. And it has to have all of these ports available and open. And if you are doing any type of firewalling, they have a whole document that describes how you should set this up. I think you may be better off just getting a wide open connection and not having to worry about any of that.
Yeah, because like right now in this room, this den right now, there was the only on the business account. There was the only one that was very secluded. That is because they don't want nobody inside the room. They want everything to be secluded and isolated. That was the only room, so I had to clean out the other room just for this test. It's just like it has a Wi-Fi. I mean, you have a residential internet, so that was definitely a long process for like 2 weeks. But it's still worth it. I passed the exam.
And congratulations.
And another thing, too, is that when I took the exam, it was a lot of PBQs, a lot of performance-based questions. I was a bit shocked on that.
A lot of people are finding a lot more of them. It's something they're putting a little. I think they're trying to put a little more emphasis on those to see how people would react.
Yeah, I was a little bit shocked about that. About man, so many PB. I remember I took the Network Plus and the A Plus. It'll be a couple of PBQs, and then they'll go to all the multiple choice. But it was like a lot of PBQs, and I was like, man, that kind of threw me off. But lucky I still passed it, whatever. So, and once again, I bought your material, your study guide, and you definitely are yeoman to the IT industry, and you really helped me out with this test.
I'm glad that worked out for you. I'm glad you got your certification in. I know we're sort of in this transition period. Probably by the time we get to July, we're all going to be much more comfortable with all of this.
Okay. So thank you for your time, Mr. Professor.
Appreciate the call, Kevin. Best of luck.
All right.
I used to live in Pembroke Pines, among other places in South Florida, so it's nice to hear from the folks down in my former neck of the woods. Let's go back to the phone calls to the 443 area code. Hello, caller. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, good afternoon, Professor Messer. I'm David. I'm calling from Baltimore.
Hey, David.
First of all, I just want to thank you for your materials. I particularly like your tests because it's not just that you have the tests, but you have the answers and the wrong answers. And I find that to be a tremendous way to reinforce everything I learned, or possibly even to learn it for the first time. But I found it a tremendous learning tool, and I did miss it for Network Plus, but I did pass Network Plus even without it. And now I'm hopefully going to take Security Plus next week. My question is this. I was in IT or computer tech, whatever you want to call it, for 28 years, mostly a programmer. I took a professional detour for 7 years. And then due to COVID, I lost my job, and I found out that my state was sponsoring a cybersecurity program. So I've been taking these courses and taking the tests, and now I'm at Security Plus. So my question is this. How can I best present myself now that I'm re-entering the tech field? I was mostly a programmer back in my previous IT career, but I did do desktop support. I supported a number of researchers assembling their PCs, believe it or not, maintaining them. And, I did about 3 years of that. That's like the only support I really the main support role I had in those years. But how do I present myself? I've listened to other after shows, and you say that help desk is the way to break in. How do I present myself?
It's certainly one of the most common ways to break in. But one of the advantages you have, which other people don't have necessarily going into this, is that you have some practical industry experience. And the things that you did, although you're sort of waving it off like, well, I did some of this stuff and worked. Yes, you did, actually. You worked with this hardware. You set it up. You got it running. You worked with operating systems. You understand the way these applications work. And you did it, and people paid you to do it. So you have professional experience working with these computing systems and doing things, especially in the IT world, that were not specific to programming. They were a little bit outside the scope of application development. So that is, you should emphasize these things. You should say you have a practical experience, that you understand the challenges, that you've had to work through problems that occur when you put these things together, that you've had to maintain these systems, that you've had to remove the malware, or whatever the things were that you did, are very good things to put on a resume and to talk to people about, that you have some practical experience doing, so that when they hire you, you can hit the ground running. You're not going to need a lot of training on the specifics, because they're things that you're already familiar with. The other piece you may want to consider doing, since you're since you're boomerang back into all of this, is that it would be nice if you had some recent activity with some of these things. And if you set up a lab at home, or you set up the way that things are going to, in my video, How to Get a Job in IT with No Experience, I talk about doing some of this. You've set up a firewall and an IPS at home, or you've set up Active Directory on a Windows server, 20, whatever you'd like to choose. 2016 is a good one to use. So you've got some choices of how you can set up at home, so that when you go into an interview, you can tell people, not only did I used to do this in the past, but I've got a lab running at home with Active Directory. It's got its own DNS. It's one I've connected all my systems in my house to. I've got some VMs running. I manage those VMs with group policy. Here are some things that I've modified on some of them. So you can tell stories about how you're interacting with what undoubtedly is the largest type of infrastructure you're going to find in most organizations, which is Microsoft Active Directory. So there's your good 1-2 punch, especially if you're trying to get back into this field or into IT in general, is you're ready for the help desk, or maybe even desktop support. Maybe you can skip the help desk from your prior experience and go straight to desktop support. And you've got some knowledge with Active Directory that you maybe weren't paid for back in the day, but you've done enough in your local lab that you can talk the Active Directory story to people, and you tell people about all the problems you had installing it, how you finally got it running, how you've now got machines connected to it, and here you set up some group policy to lock a machine down, or to change the passwords, or to push out a certificate, or whatever it happens to be. There's so many things you could do with Active Directory. The only other thing that I might recommend for you, and I don't often recommend this, but since you have the background in this, is maybe become more familiar with PowerShell, especially in the Microsoft environments, and Python. These are probably not the things employers are looking for out of the gate. And if you're going into an interview for the help desk, you may not specifically mention those skills. But if it's a job posting that you're going after that's more desktop support or server support, having the knowledge of PowerShell and Python, and or either one of those, depending on the environment and depending on the employer, would really be helpful as a skill set you're bringing to the table. And since you already have some of the background on the development side, that may just be something that's so natural for your knowledge base that you can leverage that if you walk into an interview with someone else.
Okay, thank you very much. Could I ask you one last question?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. As I pointed out, I was in IT for a long time. And how do I work the age angle?
The best way to work around ageism, and ageism for you young kids that don't have to worry about ageism, is a bit of a problem, not just in IT, but sort of in any industry at all, is companies may not necessarily realize that they aren't hiring the old folks. They aren't hiring the over 40 crowd. There is something in IT called the gray hair principle, or no hair principle in my case, where people who've been around a while actually have some skills. They've seen some stuff and can help the process along. And the problem, if you're bouncing between industry and you used to be at a higher level in one industry, and now you're getting into IT, you're kind of starting at the bottom and working your way up again, and the age differences may be relatively dramatic. There are a couple of ways to approach this. One is go to work for somewhere that has a much broader or liberal hiring perspective on age, like a state or federal government agency. They tend to be less interested in how old you are and what your specifics are of your where you come from and what you're like. They just want somebody who knows how to do the job. When you get into more private companies, though, and this, of course, is not the same across all private companies, but this is sort of my perspective of what I've seen, you may need some additional leverage. And in that case, knowing people is your leverage. Through the things you've been doing for the past 10 years, hopefully you've been able to accumulate some people's names and connections and what they're able, you know people in the industry. Even if they're not in the IT department, these can be people to reach out to say, hey, you work at this company. Does your IT department have any openings? Do you know the person in IT? Can you put in a good name? Can I send you my resume? Can you hand that off to them and give me a gold star? And that's one that actually might help more than your skill set. We often say it's not what you know, it's who you know. And when you're hiring, that's a pretty big thing. Who you know becomes something you can really leverage. And even though you might be a little older than people they normally hire, yeah, but you know Bob in accounting, or you know Fred in IT, or you know Becky in accounting. And now you have a connection. You have a personal connection to the company based on the company you keep. And don't dismiss that. I talk about how to get a job in IT with no experience, that ideally you would need a formal education, some industry certification, some practical experience. And that fourth element is somebody who already works there. I've had about 15, 20 different jobs in IT through the years. Some of these jobs were with going from company to company. Some of them are where I moved from position to position within the same company. The first job I got in IT, I didn't know anybody who worked in that company. As I've mentioned before, I'm still not sure why they hired me, but they did. But every job I got after that, all of the additional 14 or 19 jobs I got after that, I knew somebody who worked there. And it did not necessarily somebody I hung out with. It was a professional knowledge of someone, as somebody I knew in the industry, somebody I had met before, somebody I had had some business dealings before, but I knew them. I had their business card. We had talked before. We would recognize each other if we saw each other on the street. Hey, aren't you blah, blah, blah from that place? Yes, I am. You can reach out to those people and let them know, I want to interview at this company and you work there. Any tips? Who should I talk to? Can I mention your name? Would you like to put in my resume? Because I don't think I've mentioned this lately. If in many of these companies, if an employee hands in your resume, they get a finder's fee. So there may actually be a financial advantage to hiring you if it's somebody you know. So wouldn't that be great? You get hired because you know them. They get money because they know you. So that's a win-win. So take advantage of those situations too. I think those things together can kind of get over that ageism hump. It's not something you'll find everywhere, but if you do run into it, it's nice to be prepared.
Thank you so much, Professor Messer, and thank you for your wonderful programs. They've been great.
Thanks, David. I appreciate the call. It's one of those where you kind of have to be prepared for everything. I sometimes, I do this full time, but I sometimes think, if I go back and do a job at a company doing this, if I go do security work again, how's that going to turn out? Will they want to hire me? Should I grow some hair? Should I look younger? Should I get a sports car? So I wonder about the ageism part of it. Maybe I'm overdoing it. That's one of those situations where you have to wonder, is that going to work out for me? We have to think about this as we get older in our industry. Once you get up to a certain level, though, you already know everybody in your industry and you kind of hop between companies because you know people that are already there. But if you're not in the industry, you aren't at that point yet. So it's that plus or minus. There's advantages and disadvantages with that. Let's go to the Atlanta area code 770. Hi, caller. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
My name is Quentin, and I am calling from Atlanta, Georgia. How are you
Quentin,
today,
thanks for
Professor
calling. I'm very well. Thank you for calling.
Excellent, excellent. I wanted to tell you, first of all, do not grow your hair. I've been bald. I'm only 33, and I've been shaving my head for 18 years.
Never a bad hair day.
So yeah, never, unless you cut yourself, unless I cut myself shaving.
That's right.
But I wanted to let you know, I wanted to say thank you for everything that you do. I passed my Security Plus exam on the 29th of last month.
Great.
I scored a 789.
Nice.
And the first time I actually scored a 700, and I was highly upset. But I went back, reviewed it some more, configured, focused on the PBQs with the performance-based questions, and I nailed it on the second one.
Nice. Congratulations.
Second try. Thank you very much. No, thank you. Thank you. My question is, I was thinking about going, I'm kind of debating on what I want my first job to be, just because I was going to do my CCNA, but my brother, who actually works in information security at the Congressional Budget Office, suggested that I get my AWS certification first. And I said, the cloud practitioner? He said, no. He said, we're going for the solution architect first try.
Wow,
Let's
okay.
get it. And I said, okay, that's a bit aggressive. He said, I know. He said, but you can do it. And I'm going over the cloud practitioner information just so that I have a base of information for it. And then I'm going to go for the solution architect. What are your thoughts on that?
That is certainly probably the hottest area for hiring in IT right now, is anything relating to the cloud. To the point that I have 2 kids in college right now. I have 3 kids. One that just got out of college with her IT degree. My middle son is getting a cloud computing degree. And I pushed that. I won't say I pushed him into it. He wanted to learn it, but I was happy to hold the door open as he walked through that to get it. It is a great field right now. I was just looking at some of the job postings that are out there wanting that type of knowledge. And it's remarkable how many organizations at a very broad breadth of organizations is wanting that level of knowledge. It's one of those situations where your brother's absolutely right. There is a need for this type of knowledge out there. I don't think, by the way, you could have gone wrong with the CCNA either. It's just a different set of jobs associated with that. If you want to go, he said, no, that's just warm. You want to go hot. And he said, here's the hot right now. And to be fair, you are in a part of the country where there are just tons of IT jobs around this, huge organizations that need that level. And you can go to the CNNs and the weather channels and the transportation companies, literally trains, planes, and automobiles in Atlanta for those large companies doing that type of thing. You've got IT-related companies in the area. You've got financial companies in the area with E-Trades. You've got all of the government agencies and federal agencies in Atlanta. Just a huge, you're in a great geography. It's kind of what I'm saying. So you're in a sort of the best possible world of things combined together to take advantage of anything related to cloud computing. As you've probably seen, and if you haven't, you should probably go look at some of these job postings out there. So go out to the Indeeds and LinkedIn jobs and Dice and all of those, and have a look at the jobs in your area and see what they're hiring, just to qualify that, yes, you are absolutely working towards the right thing. They will effectively point you in the right direction if you start reading through those. I would say anything in the cloud field is going to be on the people's top list of things, because there's just not enough people out there that know how to do this. I was working with a cloud computing company in Atlanta, and this was a number of years ago, but even they were struggling to find people that could help them with the orchestration side of things. They had the technology down. They were a cloud computing company, but the secret in cloud is not the setup. The secret in cloud is making it dance, and the orchestration and the ability for your Python scripting and understanding what to script and how to script it is perhaps one of the most sought after skill sets in cloud computing right now. So I think you're spot on. You can't go wrong. You pick like 3 things there that are highly sought after, especially in your geography. And they're things that you'll be doing literally the rest of your career. So you'll always have that foundation to pull from. And the third part of that is you're in the geography where there's a lot of companies that want that, and they're willing to pay you some good money for that. So I'm all in. I give it a big check mark.
Okay. That's what I was thinking, because my initial plan was to get my Security Plus, then do my CCNA, learn Python and Linux pretty much all at the same time, and then go for the AWS. But since I'm doing this, I do know that I still need to learn the scripting language, and of course Linux and Ubuntu would be beneficial in the cloud computing space.
You really can't go wrong. A good strong foundation in Linux, a good strong foundation in anything Python related. For those of you that are not interested in cloud computing, you're doing a ton of stuff in Windows. You can almost take the same idea and apply it to PowerShell. But getting a good foundation in Python is extremely valuable. You are spot on. You got the right idea. All of those ingredients that you're putting into the pot to stir around are exactly the type of thing employers are looking for. And you probably won't find a single job that is able to pull from all of those at every level, but they all work together. The synergy between all of those technologies is there. Companies are just trying to find ways to take advantage of it. And if you can somehow add that little spark to any piece of that, then you're going to be very marketable in the job field.
Very good. Thank you very much. Oh, and one last thing. I actually applied for a very entry-level service desk position with my current role. I work in finance, and I've been doing like card disputes and fraud for a few years, and I was interested in IT. So I told them I put in my cover letter that I was studying for my Security Plus. They requested an A+, and I told them I was just about to get my Security Plus. They requested an associate's in business. I have my bachelor's. They sent me my denial letter, and the next day I passed my Security Plus.
This is one of those situations, though, that might be a very good denial. I think you're destined for other things. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Best of luck, Quentin. That's a good story right there. All the right ideas, all of the right things are going in place right there. Look at the combination, though. If you got Linux, your Linux is such a strong foundation on the cloud side, and I realize there's, of course, even as much a strong foundation these days. Azure has come on extremely strong. So a huge Windows emphasis. Almost every company is putting their Microsoft technologies in the cloud. So there's also places to go there. If you're a Windows person, it doesn't matter what operating system you know, but there's plenty of jobs out there doing the Linux piece. It's that Python piece that kind of is the glue, kind of sticks everything together. It allows you to talk off to all of these other devices. The last job I had where somebody else paid me, my focus was on next generation firewalls, and my specialty there was integrating the API of the next generation firewall through different libraries, different APIs. So being able to access that firewall through Perl, through Python, through whatever scripting language you could find to be able to do that. It was a REST-based system to be able to pull information from that device. So how do you automate? How do you orchestrate? And how do you make the firewall bounce around, especially in a cloud-based environment where it's no longer a physical device, you're just spinning up software. Well, how do you spin up that software with the right configuration? Earlier in this study group, we did a firewall config. Imagine if you spun up a firewall, but the configuration had to match the environment it was being spun up in. It's going to be different every time. So how do you automate all of those configuration settings that we made? That was the idea behind that. And it's really Python that the industry has basically decided, this is pretty good stuff. We're going to use this to make everything dance. So if you're anybody who's interested in that world, that's a great place to go. Back to Florida. Go to South Florida to Boca, the 561 area code. Hi, caller. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, hi, Professor Messer. This is Ed calling from Miami Lakes.
It's Ed, Miami Lakes. How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing fine. Thanks for calling. Get a good South Florida contingent today.
Yeah. Well, the reason I'm calling is because of the story that I read recently about a hack regarding SolarWinds.
Oh, yes.
And this was a supply chain hack. This company did network security for Fortune 500 companies and the federal government. And it happened by an attacker inserting malware in a patch or an update that they were getting ready to push out to their clients. And as I was thinking about this, I thought that, it seemed like there were some tools out there that we already had that could have probably prevented this. And what came to mind is, like, for instance, when I download an app from the internet, like Veracrypt, for instance, they post on their website a message digest, or they use like MD5 to hash the file for the update.
Sure.
And then when you download that file, you run the same hash using the same algorithm. And if your digest equals what they posted on their website, then you know that it's the exact copy that you're supposed to receive. So I'm wondering if possibly when they created this update, if they had that, first of all, in a secure, say, air-gapped situation where the server was air-gapped, and then they ran an algorithm like that, a hashing algorithm, and it came up with a digest, then they would know if that was ever, manipulated at any point. And couldn't that have been used to prevent this kind of attack?
For most situations, I would agree that would be a perfectly valid way to at least ensure that the code you had downloaded matched the code that somebody had posted on their website. You would at least have some validation that you could do that those two things matched perfectly. For this attack, and I think it was last month or the month before, I sort of talked a little bit about this attack specifically. And at the time, it was one that had just been announced, but it really had occurred much earlier. It's been in the work for months. It was really only just publicly made available to the rest of us. But I read through the report that was created. That's really not giving us details yet. And I don't know if we're ever going to get all of the details. But the one thing that I mentioned is that this was a really, really, really bad attack. It's probably one of the worst ones that we had ever seen in the industry. And that sort of sounds hyperbolic, but it really, I'm trying to give you some perspective on just how broad the scope of this is, how bad the type of attack this was, how invasive it was, and who the victims of this attack are, which are wide-ranging. We were only discovering back then that, oh yeah, they got into the federal government, had already created separate keys to be able to get into people's emails without them knowing, and we're reading through all of the State Department's emails without anyone even knowing they were there. That's incredibly sophisticated. But to your point about hashing and integrity and ensuring that the thing that you're downloading is the thing that was originally posted would not have helped with this particular attack, because the attackers were not modifying code that was already compiled and ready for the end users. They were modifying the actual source code before it was compiled. So by the time it got rolled up for people to download, they had already injected all of their code into this. This is what we've been able to kind of piece together. We don't know the details behind all of this yet. They're giving it to us in tiny little pieces. But this is one where they were effectively, the hackers were programmers for SolarWinds. And they went in and modified the actual source code so that when it all got rolled up and compiled, their bad stuff was just stuck in there. So even if at that point they would have created some type of integrity, whether they had digitally signed the file, whether they had created a hash for the file, and digital signatures is how it's done most of the time. If you get a Microsoft update, it's been digitally signed by Microsoft. So not only do you know it's the same file that Microsoft sent to you, you know it really came from Microsoft. There's non-repudiation associated with that. Same thing for SolarWinds. I'm sure they had non-repudiation set up for their updates as well. It just makes perfect sense. The problem was the bad guys got their stuff in there well before the digital signature was made. So it would not help. The digital signature was valid. It was exactly what SolarWinds sent down to you. It's exactly what they posted on their side. It just happened to have the malware stuck inside of it. And the malware itself and the way that it operated was just invasive and very, very intelligent. And once it got in, created the back doors, and everyone was off to the races. They must have had quite the setup. Well, the hackers must have had quite the setup, a whole boiler room full of people, because you can imagine when that update went out, you suddenly had hacked hundreds of companies immediately. Imagine one thing, and suddenly you have full access to all of these companies and organizations and corporate entities and governmental entities and large companies. They now have the world at their fingertips. Just a massive, horrible, invasive hack that we still are getting stories. I just got one in my email today. Here's what we found out this week of this particular hack. This is going to go on for quite some time, and we're still unrolling all of this, parsing it. We're still burning down all of these companies and building them back up again so we can be assured that we got rid of all the bad guys. It's going to take some time, and we're still in the middle of it.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy, all right. I know that nothing's 100% secure anymore, and I keep thinking, there has to be a way that, okay, I understand that they corrupted the code prior to the compiling it, but what if they were to have, when they were writing that code and storing that code, putting that code in a more secure environment where it's not attached to the internet, where they couldn't get into that data to begin with? I mean, isn't that a possibility?
Yeah, but now it's what it could have, should have. That's, of course, that they should have done it that way. Of course, there should have been more secure controls over the code. Of course, there should have been ways to prevent somebody from gaining access into that, but they didn't. And there's nothing in the world of computing that would allow us out here as a customer to know what they're doing with their code. We kind of have to trust them. And to your point, whenever you download code from the internet and install it, you don't know what's in that code. You're simply trusting that if you download it from Microsoft, that it must be okay. If you're downloading it from Google, it must be okay. If you're downloading it from Apple, it must be okay. But you don't know. You have no idea. It's whenever we talk about security, is all based on trust. Ultimately, this is what we mean. There are some people in the industry, security professionals, who will not upgrade the software on their computer until it has been vetted for months, or in some cases even years, before they even decide, I'm not going to Windows 10. I'm going to stay on Windows 8 because I'm still seeing problems with Windows 10 out there and things that people are installing. And only then they're installing well-installed, well-vetted updates to those operating systems, and they won't install anything from manufacturers. I update things on my computer all the time. There's automatic updates. Oh, look, there's another version of Discord. Oh, look, there's another version of Chrome. Let me install it. I'm that person. But I'm trusting that code that I'm downloading doesn't have anything bad inside of it that's going to give people access to my device. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case with SolarWinds.
Yeah. I got one more question before I let you go.
Sure.
If you could, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
About back doors. Can you tell us more, like exactly what back doors are, how they're delivered? How do you know if you even have one on your system, and how are they accessed by an attacker?
There's no single way and no single type of backdoor. It's a very generic term when we use it this way. And all it really means is once somebody gets on a system, how can they be assured that they can get back in there again? Let's take the example of SolarWinds, where they were able to take advantage of a vulnerability to gain access to an operating system on these machines. But if you're normal companies and you find you find that the update has come out, Microsoft has their monthly update, and you want to patch your computer, those updates come out, you patch your computer, and now that vulnerability no longer exists. If a bad guy gets into your computer with that vulnerability, they're very concerned that you're going to patch it, which means tomorrow when they try to get in using the same vulnerability, they can't get in there anymore. So the moment they get into that computer, they start building a nest. They start taking up residence. And one of the ways they take up residence is they try to find ways to gain access to the machine some other way, because they know eventually you're going to patch this machine. So they'll create, maybe the back door is simply an account called Professor Messer with a password on it, and that's it. That's their back door. If they patch the machine, that's okay. I've got a legitimate login to that machine now, and I can log right in. In fact, my login I created with a root login or administrator access. So I've got administrator login on that device. Maybe instead they run an application that opens up a port that they're able to access using a remote desktop or remote control program. That's their backdoor into that system. The backdoor can take many different forms, many different types. It can be protected or not protected in different ways. It can be an application that runs during a certain time of the day. It can just anything that allows them to get back into that system without having to rely on the system being vulnerable. They're effectively building their own screen door in the back that they have the key to, and they can walk in whenever they'd like.
So basically what you're saying is they'll either set up their own credentials, or they're finding what kind of applications you have on your system, looking for vulnerabilities, and then entering in that way.
I think the vulnerability piece is how they get there initially. That's how they get in for the very first time. But once you're in, you don't want to have to rely on taking advantage of a vulnerability to get in the second time, because you're in now. The hardest part is getting in the door. And if you found a vulnerability that gets you there, now you need something a little more reasonable. I think creating an account's a perfect example of a backdoor, because an account's normal. That account you can get to from the login prompt, just like everybody else logs into that application or that machine. Some people will install a RAT, which is a remote access or remote administration tool, where they can access it with a client from outside. It just opens up a port number on their machine and runs as an executable, and nobody even notices unless they do a process check. In fact, they might even name the executable sysconfig.exe, which looks legitimate if you look at it in a process list, but in reality, it's opened up a port, and if somebody accessed it through that port from the outside, they would effectively have remote control access to that machine and be able to do anything they'd like. And they don't have to rely on a vulnerability to do that, because now they have their own application doing it for them. They are now set up on that machine. They've taken up residence, and now they can access it whenever they want, even if you patch the machine.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy stuff, all right.
This is the problem we have with
listen,
the SolarWinds.
Yeah. Well, hey, listen, thank you very much for your time and your information, sir.
Thanks, Ed. Best of luck.
Thank you.
It's one of the problems that we have with the SolarWinds hack is that once they got in, we realized they were doing all kinds of different things. Some groups would start downloading files. Some groups would start gaining access to email. Some groups would start setting up a pivot point, and they would find other machines on the network and start taking up residence on those. This is every situation here was a little bit different. These were not script kiddies. These were well-funded, knowledgeable hackers. This is the creme de la creme of being able to find and hack and gain control of systems. These are smart people. So now we have to be smarter than them. For most of these organizations, they are deleting everything and starting over. When something like this happens in your organization, the only way to get rid of this is to delete every machine, burn it to the ground, and rebuild it. Either rebuild it with a brand new config or a known good backup. That is the only way to do it. Now, if you're a company with 100 devices, maybe that's not horrible. But we're talking about federal agencies, multi-billion-dollar Fortune 500 companies. They have thousands of machines, tens of thousands of machines, in some cases probably more. How can you imagine going through and deleting everything and bringing all of that back? They're still working on that. They're still doing those things. Quite a challenge. Let's go to the 404 area code, back to Atlanta. Thanks for holding for so long. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Professor Messer. My name is Kareem Martin. I'm calling from the Atlanta metro area of Duluth, Georgia.
Yes, you are. Thanks for calling.
Okay, I got two questions. One may be kind of easy, one may be kind of hard. The first one, when you look at Pen Test Plus being the quote red team, CISA Plus being the blue team, CompTIA being the white team, and that whole ecosystem of CompTIA now for security, which is good. And you look at how you can stack your certifications with Cloud Plus, Linux Plus, Service Plus, etc. And also looking at the DoD standard 8140, which used to be 8570, where when you look at there, it's a list of those. Surprisingly, Pen Test Plus, Security Plus, CISA, all over there. How do you think that ecosystem stacks up to, say, the Amazon AWS stuff compared to the Azure stuff, compared maybe to some of the Cisco stuff, maybe, even some of the CISSP stuff, which, CISSP now has 4 different levels, one being specifically for hospital information. And lastly, some of the Apple stuff as far as, we're not talking about price, because I go back, and you want to understand too, go back to the CISSP days where that was all it is. You took the test one place and took the lab somewhere else. I mean, I remember to this day, I took the CISSP lab in Washington, D.C.
Right.
So, that's my first question. How do you think that CompTIA security ecosystem stacked with Linux Plus, Server Plus, maybe Cloud Plus versus everybody else?
This is something we didn't even have, 10 years ago? When I started doing just hardcore security, which was being a systems engineer for that next-gen firewall company, when I started there, which was probably just over 10 years ago, it's kind of surprising that it is that long ago, all there really was CISSP. And sort of a few derivatives around there. And yes, other firewall companies had their certifications. And I had just come from McAfee at the time, Network Associates. I had all those PGP and Gauntlet firewall certifications. Boy, that's helping me right now.
No doubt.
That's, I was at the time an amazing proxy-based firewall, fantastic capabilities the industry had never seen. Now, of course, does not exist in any way, shape, or form. But we had sort of this ad hoc, whatever you can get sort of security piece. But we all really realized CISSP was the gold standard. And in some ways, CISSP sort of is still the gold standard. But it has now been... there's a lot more choices. It's been watered down a little bit. Just in 10 years, CompTIA has built all of these new security certifications for good reason. The industry didn't really have a good focus on security from a validation or certification perspective. And I think the big driver for this, for better or worse, was the U.S. federal government. They were driving CompTIA to find ways to make our federal government smarter with cybersecurity. And I think they did a pretty good job, as you just mentioned, of laying out a structure that would allow people to learn these skills, validate that they have learned these skills, and be able to use these skills in an organization. And it's not surprising that the government has added them to their list and is maintained in that list, because CompTIA has done a very good job at finding, lobbying, creating, and putting those into that list, along with other companies as well. Because you've seen changes from the Palo Alto Networks, you've seen changes from the ISC², you've seen changes from other individual companies and organizations with their own certifications. And there's a lot more choices today than there ever was. So I think CompTIA has done a very good job at kind of piecing together the structure. Is it Is it the structure we need? And if you're going to compare it to anything, you sort of have to compare it on the security side. Once you step outside the scope of security and you look at the Azure certifications, the AWS certifications, those are, and even the Google IT certification, those are really good certifications, but they're very specific to that niche. And if you're going into a job that deals with cloud computing, AWS is a good thing to have, and their suite of certifications is good to know. Or if you're going into the federal government, Azure certifications is highly sought after. People would love you to be knowledgeable in those. But the security tends to still be, except for CompTIA, kind of out there and hasn't changed that much. There's still, for example, the CEH, the Certified Ethical Hacker, which I've spoken of before. I don't really hold it in very high regard, although it's one of these double-edged sort of yin and yang certifications for me, because I like the content associated with CEH. I just don't like the organization that provides it. I shouldn't say I don't like. I've really never dealt with them. I don't hold them in a very high regard given their past history. This is one of the things that the industry is sort of figuring out at this point, is we needed some scope, some guidance. We needed some linearity and linearity, and find some way to kind of step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, because all we used to really have is Security Plus, and from there you had to go to a manufacturer and get their cert, which really was not a good scope at all. Now at least we can focus in on individual pieces and go after that. If you really want to go into red team, blue team, security focus, maybe the CompTIA certifications make a lot of good sense. Maybe focusing on some of the options from ISC squared make a lot of good sense. And now you have options. But I probably would not swap those in and out for something on the AWS side or Azure side. I think those are sort of standalone and have their own requirement. I kind of look at those as, if you're going into security, you should already know this cloud stuff. You should already be familiar with Linux. You should already know Microsoft Windows. You should already have familiarity with Active Directory and how that security works. You kind of need that foundation. You also have to know the networking side. So CCNA, even to that degree, or even the CCNA security stuff, is a good foundation for those. I kind of think of those as the starting point, and then you layer on top of that the security pieces. Obviously, that's not something that any of us would be able to do overnight, but I think if you're looking at a 5 to 10 year arc for your career, I think building and pulling in all of those different and diverse certifications is going to make you a better technologist, especially if you put the security pieces on top of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And before I throw my second question, I just want to say I passed Security Plus this past January 15th. And in my case, over half the exam I took was performance-based stuff and command line of all things.
Wow.
And my multiple choice was truly multiple choice, because just about every multiple choice question I got had 2 answers that came with it.
Right.
It's crazy. The second part of it, I'm going to say I strongly disagree with you on 501 being easy. I think I said
That's
the comment
fair.
section, how dare you, sir?
That's fair.
True.
I'll take that.
601 is no walk in the park. 601 is no walk in the park, but 501, I know people that have taken it 2 and 3 times already. Here's now, this may be one of those controversial questions when it comes to Pentest Plus / Hacker and CISA being policy. In your humble opinion, is it a chicken or the egg question to say, okay, when you talk about policy, not enforcing it, just writing it, do you think the policy guys with the chip on their shoulder about thinking like a hacker and pen testers have it wrong? Because you had to be able to, I'm going all the way back to the old school Rainbow series before the O'Reilly Rainbow series with the federal government, and looking at where we are right now in 2021, to be able to write the Python, to configure the firewalls, to I'm just picking on CompTIA because I'm saying this is
Sure.
what I'm dealing with right now. But
Yep.
you take Linux Plus, stacked with Security Plus, with Security Plus stacked with Cloud Plus. Not talking about their Cloud Essentials Plus yet, but just that skill set. And then you stack that with, you either do the pen test side, CISA side, or you make it to the CASPA side, or you get all four. You got Security Plus, you got pen test, CISA, CASPA, and then you have stacked Cloud Plus, Linux Plus, Server Plus. And like you just mentioned, that's a strong skill set.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get to a policy person who I've met some people who skipped Security Plus and took CISA 2 or 3 times just to have CISA. But then you say, okay, I understand your logic because you want to be a policy person. But then when it comes showtime and it comes you're interviewing for a job and you look at the salary, you can't be upset because, in my opinion, policy writers, you can make a policy writer quicker than you make someone who actually knows what they're doing on the command line and understand the technology. That's just me. Not belittling how hard you worked and you paid $1,000 to finally pass, CISA. Not belittling that. I'm just simply saying, is it the chicken or the egg situation? You have to acknowledge the fact, hey, it started here. You can get it to command line. You can understand the operating system. You can understand, Linux command line, PowerShell, the Mac, Debian, not Debian, but BSD style command line stuff, and then coming forward, and then the general ecosystem, whether it's finance, whether it's, whatever. Give me your take on that.
This is something that has not changed since way back in the day, and I don't see that it's going to change much going forward either. I think of this in the perspective of auditors. This is what I had to deal with in my past is we were technologists. We were running the network and security and operating systems and desktops. And then you bring in a third party to audit, and the auditors start throwing out things that don't even make sense. They don't have practical experience in doing this, but they do have this checklist of things. And the checklist says that this is what you should do, but you're not doing it in your environment. And like, for instance, you need to do this thing with Linux. And then we'd say, well, we don't have that thing with Linux. Well, you need to do that. Well, how am I supposed to do that if I don't have it? Well, we're going to ding you on it. You're not going to pass the audit because you don't have that thing. Well, am I supposed to just build a new Linux machine with that thing on it because your audit says I should have that? Yes, that's how you should do it. Some of these things just never made sense to me. It's sort of the same situation today because we still have policy writers and auditors and needing to check these things. And they do fulfill an important part of this because obviously we're still getting hacked. We were just talking about SolarWinds, a massive, massive breach. And it's now harder than ever to stop these things from coming into the network. We're trying to find new ways just to combat it. Just identify it is hard enough these days. We're turning to machine learning and big data just to be able to find somebody trying to get into our networks. We used to just be able to pull up an IPS, stick it on your network, and you could find everything. Well, those days are long gone. We're not even close to that anymore. It's not even getting easier. It's getting harder to do this. So it's a yin and yang situation again, where we need some broad thinkers to give us some ideas about how would we broadly protect what we're doing? How will we keep this data protected? How do we keep our users protected? How do we make sure and keep the bad guys out? But at the same time, there's that practical side of it that often is overlooked, or for whatever reason, sometimes political, is overlooked because they don't have to. And taking, how do you fit real world with policy? And it's one of those that if you're good at doing that and you really do have a good perspective of how those things work together, you can go work for the largest, biggest companies doing the security piece because you have a skill set nobody else seems to have. You have a perspective that nobody else seems to have. But there's always going to be a learning curve to get to that point. And unfortunately, very often we're having to work with people that are still in that learning curve to figure out the details. It's one of those situations where I worked with a manager back in the day who was very smart with this, who said he noticed that I was, hard to believe, I was very headstrong. I was very confrontational when I saw dumbness. No. Whenever I saw people not doing things smart, I was definitely not good at approaching or explaining my unhappiness regarding that particular level of dissatisfaction. And he said, look, you're going to find political issues. Politics is going to be everywhere you go. You're fighting it for some reason, but you're not going to get rid of it. So instead of fighting it, why don't you learn how to work with it and find ways to make it work for you rather than against you? And he was right. Like, I needed to kind of take a step back, get a little more well-honed in the nuance of the political situation of we call it politics, but it's really interpersonal skills. Get a little more nuanced at how you can work with people better, figure out their motivations, see how you can work with their motivations to ultimately figure out how to make it work on your side. And once you sort of can find a way to make those things happen, and you kind of take more of your more emotion out of it and be more practical. This is why I never went into law, because I'd be a horrible lawyer. I'd be yelling at everybody in the courtroom. But if you could find a way to just take a step back out of your brain, out of yourself, and look at the big picture and not put any emotion into it and figure out how to make the chessboard work a little better for you, it ultimately works better for everybody. And I think also taking some of the emotion out of it also makes you healthier. It did for me anyway, because this is not, for most of us, this is not a live or die situation. We're working for an insurance company. We're working for a car rental company. We're working for a department that does taxes. Obviously, I've worked with people that work in hospitals, that work for military, that work for the police. These are the fire department, the 911 calls. These are life and death. And I'm not in any way saying that those are not, because they absolutely are. And there's needs and concerns and a reason to be passionate about those situations. But for other, where it doesn't make sense, there's no reason to get angry and upset about that. You should pick your fights, the real important fights, for the things that are actually really important. And it is nothing you can kind of learn on a live stream or even in a set of YouTube videos, but it's more of finding a way to interact with the world as you go through your career that makes everyone happy. You ultimately, everybody gets what they need, but you do it in a way that is much easier to go through the process. It's maybe it is a little ego, maybe it's a little emotion, maybe it's, and everybody wants the right thing for everybody. I don't think anybody comes at this with wanting to take over the world. You're not looking to be evil. You're just trying to make sure that all the data is secure, that all the people are secure, that the company continues to exist, that you're able to get a paycheck at the end of the week. But there is a need to be able to be pragmatic about it. And that's one of the hardest things. I often say that we have to be good at working with people in IT. The computer part's easy. The computers are ones and zeros. They do exactly what we tell them. You give them the same question, they give you the same answer every time. That's a simple set of skills, relatively speaking. The hard part is the human interaction. And if you become good at that, you can do anything in this industry.
That's true too. Well, my final one, to call it the daily double. In your lifetime experience dealing with SOC 2, Type 1, Type 2, why is it, how many times have you experienced it where the SOC 1 part, the policy, and the SOC Type 1 part, the policy, and the Type 2 part have absolutely nothing to do with each other? Half of the stuff that's in the policy has nothing to do with what's actually going on in the ecosystem. Have you ever experienced that? And I'll let you go. Thank you for taking my call, sir.
I appreciate that call. Sort of a leading question happens all the time. It's constant. It's a constant battle. Especially when you get into organizations that are so segmented. You don't see it much in smaller organizations that need to be nimble, that have a very clear goal at what needs to happen, and everybody is on board, I think those are easier things to navigate. But when you get into situations where it's a very large company and it's been split up into tiny pieces where everybody has a task, and that task is a narrow scope across all of this, it becomes more of a challenge. I'll give you an example. This is more of a technical example, but it kind of does apply towards policy and scope. I was tasked to go in and install a firewall that interacted with Active Directory. Many of the firewalls do this these days, so that if you're in the accounting department, you can create a firewall rule that says, if you're in the accounting department, you can go to this server. If you are not in the accounting department, you cannot. And the way that it determines whether you're in the accounting department or not is it looks at Active Directory to see if you are a member of the accounting department. So there has to be this interaction and integration between the firewall and Active Directory. So can you imagine an organization where there is a group of people that manages the network, a group of people that manages security and the firewall specifically. There's a group of people that manages Windows. There's another group of people that manages Active Directory, which is different, by the way, than the group of people that manage Windows. And then there's another group of people that manages, I don't know, there's a third or fourth thing in there. I think it was a hardware. So I had to find a machine, install a piece of software that integrated with Active Directory in Windows, and be able to have that device communicate to the firewall over the network. So there were like 4 or 5 different groups in something that in my lab literally takes 5 minutes to install. I had to integrate with 5 different groups, schedule time with each of them, get them in the room, describe what we were trying to do, have them tell me, no, I can't do that, and then bring the other managers in to be able to override the fact that they were telling me, no, I can't do that, so that they would finally give me a machine to put it on. Okay, I got the machine. Now I need to put it in Windows. I need to install it in Windows as an admin. Oh, no. Okay, we need to pull in the Windows team to be able to install the software, who needs to also talk to the Active Directory team to be able to have the Windows talk to Active Directory. Can you imagine? This took me all day to install a 5-minute installation, and we hadn't even done anything with the firewall yet. So it's a good example of how, was that a secure environment? That was a pretty darn secure environment. It was really, really secure because you couldn't get anything done. It wasn't that security was good. The security was awful. But boy, you just couldn't get anything accomplished. So, of course, it was secure. This happens all the time. This is one of those situations where it's just a constant battle, a push-pull. But my perspective, because at that point in my career, nothing surprised me. Nothing confused me. Of course, it's going to take 6 groups. Who's next? Let's do the next one. I was there for the duration. We just needed to figure it out. Okay, who's next on our list? Bring him in. All right. How about this? No. Well, what is the process we go through to override that no? Well, you need this signature and this person, this person. Great. We're going to get that. We'll go the next step. And you just go through the steps until you finally get to the end. And you don't get wrapped up in it. You don't get angry about it. And you don't get concerned about it. It's that is the literal example of it is what it is. We're just going to go through the process, and however long it takes, we will figure it out. And at the end of it, we will have the solution. And eventually we did get it installed. It did talk to Active Directory. We got the firewall up and running. It was able to integrate with Active Directory, and they ended up being a customer. So we showed that it did what it was supposed to do. We just had to go all the way around the barn to finally get in to see the horses, but we finally did.
Yeah, what you described, people ask me all the time, how can you be so calm? You have to.
You have to.
It is not for the squeamish. It's not for the squeamish at all, because you will be I can't even say, because it's YouTube, but I'm just saying, if you're not a calm person who looks at it like you just said, okay, we'll go do it. Oh my God, if you're that person, if the slightest thing causes you to go have a stroke level event, You're in the wrong place because this is not where you need to be.
We have worked with those
But
people
thank you
before.
again, sir.
Thanks, Kareem. I appreciate the call.
Oh, yeah. All right.
This is one of those situations, though, that you sort of get used to these things as you go through. You start off with, I was in a project, and that was the hardest project ever. And everybody says, well, yeah, because you fought it the whole time. And you'll think back and like, yeah, I did kind of fight that the whole time. How could we have done that differently? And then you sort of evolve. You figure it out over time. It's sort of that old Saturday Night Live bit where you had the IT computer guy would come in, move, and he was just the angry, just let me fix it. But you can't be that person. You have to be the moderator. You have to be the one that is keeping everybody straight. You effectively have to be the one in control. For as much as I complained that I hated being in IT management, that's what IT management is. Even if you're not called a manager or director, you're the one who has to be the leader. You're the one who has to have those skills to be able to say, all right, well, what do we need to do? How can we make that happen? There's got to be a way to make that happen, right? Yeah. Okay. So how do we do that? And then you go off to the races. That's the way you do it. It's South Florida Day, so we're going back to Miami, 786 area code. Hi, caller. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hello, how you doing, Professor Messer?
Thanks for calling. What can we do for you?
So I'm new to IT, and I just started studying for my Security Plus. I've been watching your videos, actually, so far and writing in odd notes, and I have Derek Gibson's book as well, so
Great.
I'm studying out of that. My thing is, there's a lot of different ways to get into the field, right? Like, I know people that get into the field without a certification. They just go into school, and then their resume is good, and they just get a job. And there's people that just have certs and don't have a degree. And it's like, so I'm just trying to figure out. I'm in school also for information technology. So what I'm right now, where my mind is at, I'm thinking about passing the Security Plus, and then I guess try to get maybe a pen test certification or maybe a Linux. But also I'm seeing ITIL. I don't know if you know about ITIL. So my thing is, what advice could you give me when it comes to the right road to take after I get my Security Plus? Do you think I should get another certificate or try to get a job? Or
this is one of these things.
That's where I'm looking.
Security is kind of this hard world to get into, and it's because there aren't a lot of entry-level positions in security. And it sort of is a dichotomy with what we're being told or how IT security is being presented. If you look online, you need to get into cybersecurity. Take our cybersecurity course. We have a cybersecurity degree you can get. That is one of the very broad descriptions of this. The problem is that people don't tend to hire your first job, your entry-level position doesn't tend to be an IT security position. There just aren't a lot of entry-level positions because cybersecurity is a sort of a stacking of skills that would allow you to finally have a perspective of security. We talked a little bit about this earlier. You sort of have to have knowledge in operating systems, networking, applications to some degree, being able to take all of the things you've learned with all of that as a foundation, and then security is what you stick on top of it. It's sort of the icing on the top of all of that. I've often said in these study groups that IT security specifically, for the most part, requires you be effectively an expert in networking. You need to understand switching and routing and dynamic routing protocols and how to troubleshoot routing tables and understand how to integrate these systems and understand how they all plug in so that you can start connecting all the security devices to the network. So that's why you don't tend to see a lot of employers asking for entry-level security because there's not a lot of it. But if you're in some geographies, especially large municipalities, you may find there are a number of entry-level security positions at something like a SOC, a Security Operations Center. The SOC is a great entry-level type of job because you're really just getting the basics. You're sitting there and monitoring the security systems that are in these organizations. And you're kind of learning as you go. You know nothing of what you're seeing. You don't really understand how it got to the point where it got to you, but you're starting to see the results of these monitoring systems for security. And it's a great way to at least get that entry-level spot. I often tell people, you mentioned pen test, and it's a good example of this. You're not going to find any pen test entry level. There's no such thing as pen test entry level, really. I say this in a very flippant way because there actually are people I know whose first job in security was as pen test, but that is a rarity. First, there are very few pen test jobs to begin with, and even fewer of those would even be something that an entry-level person could go after. That's changing a little bit because the industry needs more and more and more security people. So our requirements are dropping a little bit for security, and we're more willing to bring people in and teach them as we go, which we just need warm bodies, and we're running out of warm bodies. And that's what happens when you don't have enough people to hire is you start hiring whatever you've got then. We don't go to war with the group of folks we wanted. We go to war with what we got. So that's the situation we have with a lot of these security jobs now, is it's actually a little easier than it used to be to find entry-level positions, but it's still very hard. You don't find them a lot. I would recommend that you start building out a list. Create a spreadsheet of the security jobs in your area. Find out what they're looking for. And don't go after the high-end security roles. Go after kind of what people would think of as the entry-level security roles. Go find the security roles that have people working at a SOC, entry-level pen test, entry-level IT security, entry-level SIM, entry-level, whatever it happens to be, firewall administration. Assuming you can find jobs like that, put them into a spreadsheet, find out what they're asking for. What formal degree do they want? What certifications would they like you to have? What other skills are they looking for? What company certifications are they looking for? Find out if any of these match your skill set. See if you're on the right track with any of them. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you'll find that every single one of them wants you to have a Pen Test Plus. All right. Well, that tells your story. Now you know if everybody's asking for Pen Test Plus, I need to go get my Pen Test Plus. That's just one of the many things I'm sure that you will have to fill in that list of things. That may be the best way to approach it. This is a constantly changing environment, especially in getting a job. And so you have to be able to react and see where the industry is going. And unless you're monitoring where the industry is going, you're not going to know where to go next from there.
I appreciate that advice, Professor. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I appreciate the call. Thank you. One of the things that I always struggle with is how much things change and how quickly in this industry. From the time when I started working as a systems engineer for this firewall company to the time I left, it was a completely different job. And it was only 7 years, I think, during that time frame. And it continues to change dramatically because of things that we see happening. Even after all that work we've done, even after all that thought we've put into security, we still have hacks like we've seen with SolarWinds. And now we've got to readjust again. There's a whole different set of things we're going to have to do just because of that one thing. It's apparently today we're going to talk in Florida. Hello, caller from Winter Park, 407 area code. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, my name is James. Like your name is James as well. I called in before, and I don't know if anyone's asked this question already, but would you recommend someone studying for the 601, but instead taking the 501 to make the experience a little easier?
I would not, and the reason is not because one's harder and one's easier. I think we can have a big conversation about whether that's entirely true. I think 501 is going to be much easier because of the size of it and because of the number of resources available to study from. But the exam objectives between those two are really, really different. Half of the 501 exam is in the 601 study materials. So if you studied the 601 study materials, you went through all the 601 books, You watched all the 601 videos you could get your hands on. You studied everything you could possibly find about the 601. You went through the 601 exam objectives, and you could check off every single one of those exam objectives. You would still only know half of what you needed to know for the 501, because the 501 changed so much when it moved to the 601. Security Plus migrated and changed so much between those two. So you'd walk into the 501 and you'd fail it. You only knew 50% of what they were asking of you. So that's why I often tell people, pick one, and then all of your study materials really need to match the version of the exam that you've chosen, because those study materials are going to be very different with the topics. The 501 topics and the 601 topics are very, very different. The emphasis is different. There's a lot of things that have been dropped from this in the 601. I talk about the 601 being bigger, but the reality is it's only half of what the 501 had in it. So a lot of stuff they just threw out. It's not like they took the 501 and then added 30% to it. Oh, no. They took the 501, threw out half of it, moved that half over to the 601, and then added all new stuff. So for someone like me who's creating content, I'm having to build a whole new course. It's all new content to put into this thing. So I would definitely not recommend you do that.
Okay. Yeah, I just went out and bought a couple books. I got some from Amazon for 601, but I might go and get your 501 materials and start studying that from now on and see if I...
It's about what you can get your hands on. And if you go through the 601 books and you like the 601 books and the content in the 601 appeals to you, there's good reasons to go with that certification. And that's a perfectly valid, perfectly reasonable reason to go with that. If I was studying for Security Plus right now, I might go with the 601 because it takes me 6 months to study for an exam like that. I have way too much going on in my life to be able to cram it into 3 months and be comfortable with that. I usually give myself 6 months when I'm studying for an industry certification. So I can't make it by the deadline. Or it's so close that I don't want to be pushed by that. I don't want a deadline, a retirement date for certification to dictate how fast I need to study for things. So instead, I would probably shift gears about this point, about the March, April timeframe, and maybe I'll start doing 601. That might make more sense for me. Other people need to get this thing done in a month or 2 months. Maybe 501's a better choice for them. So sometimes it's just about the calendar, not necessarily about the content.
Gotcha. Thank you for that.
Yep. I appreciate the call. It's one of those situations where everybody's going to have a different story, a different need, a different requirement, a different time frame. Nobody can really tell you what's best for you. You're going to have to put all of those into a blender and figure out across all of those, how do they correlate? How am I going to make all of that happen? Because unless you do that, you're not going to have the right answer. Although in the chat room, you do make a good point. Right in the chat room says, yeah, but a deadline can really be a good motivator. I know some people that will set their date to take the exam before they start their studies, because they know if they have to be at that date at that time, that they will set up and really work on learning the material before that date arrives. Now, the reality, of course, is you can reschedule your exam 48 hours beforehand. So even if you weren't ready, you could always push it out. But that does give you some structure. You know, you can put it in a calendar, and then you can set up every day. Here's what we're going to do every day. And I get it, because I've done things like that before. And maybe the July 31st cutoff is right. There will be people taking the exam on July 31st. This happens every time. There will be people taking their exam on the final possible day you could take it. I don't recommend that. That's not the best way to go about doing it, but it happens every time. So this is one of those too. You will see people doing that every time. And maybe that's just human nature. We wait until the last minute to get it in there, and then hopefully we're able to make that. It's July 31st is the last day to take the 501. So maybe that's the way you approach it to make that happen. So figure out the way that works for you. What motivates you? For me, it's probably motivation for me is not necessarily the date. I think the motivation for me is to set up the structure based on what's going on in my world. I just say it's going to take 6 months. That's the date. Let's go. And we just work through it there. Sometimes I have a bad way. That's not exactly an accurate way to schedule things, because some things may be harder than others, but you have to start somewhere. And so for me, it's just structure. It's not necessarily banging up against a particular date or time to make that happen. Either way, you're fine. You're going to get a Security Plus certification. You're going to be Security Plus certified. That's it. I know a lot of people will say, yeah, but the 601 has newer material on it. And some of the material in 601 is newer. Not all of it is. Not all of the new material added is new stuff. Some of it has been in the security industry forever. They just changed the topics. The thing, though, is that there are people who are Security Plus certified right now that took the SY0-301. Because once you take and pass the exam, you don't take the exam again. You're done taking Security Plus exam. You don't have to take the exam ever, ever, ever again. So if you were Security Plus certified 10 years ago, all you have to do is just keep updating and maintaining your certification, getting CEUs, taking the CertMaster CE, which is not an exam, it's more of a CBT. So you never have to take the exam again. And yet they are just as Security Plus certified as someone who sits down today and passes the 601. So there really is no difference saying that taking the 501, taking the 601, that you are better or worse than the other. It's exactly the same result. There is no difference in that. Now, some people, though, it's personal. Like, I want to learn the latest things. I want to learn more about those frameworks. I want to learn more about those cloud technologies. I want to learn more about that side of things. That's a perfectly reasonable idea, perspective on certification. And that's a perfectly reasonable way to go into the 601 exam. Makes sense to me. There's no reason why you'd do anything different. So pick what works for you. For a number of people, they need to get the certification quickly, and they need to get it right now. And there's a job pending because of it, or I'm going to get fired if I don't get certified. You should be taking the 501 right now. There's no question. Like, go get the 501 quick. It's a much easier way to get through this. Get your cert, and then, okay, you're done. So it's about situation. It's all situational. Like anything else. Of course it's situational. We'll approach it in the way that makes sense for us. Find the way that makes sense for you. And either way, you'll be Security Plus certified. And at that point, as long as you maintain it, nobody can take that away from you. So it works for me. That's the approach. Eventually, for those of you wondering, you asked in the chat room, you noticed I've got about almost halfway through the videos for 601. This is going to be 167 different videos, 100 and something. I literally have the spreadsheet up right now because I've been working on this. But currently it's scheduled to be 176 videos. 84 of them have been published, which is 47.73%. But more are in the can, as they say. I've got more here ready to be edited that goes well above half. So in my mind, I've already shot more than half of these videos. So over the next month or so, you'll see another, 84 videos or so, whatever the rest is, get published out there. But that's what we're working on now, is getting those out to make that happen. So it's a lot of videos, it's a lot of content. The 601 exam, there's a lot of stuff. So that's kind of the way it works, is making that happen. Well, that brings us to the end of another study group. It's always loved doing the Security Plus study groups. It's always a topic that's sort of close to my heart, because that's kind of where I was in the industry prior to doing this full time. So always fun to see what's happening in the industry and what people are doing with it. And the new Security Plus is a lot of fun too. There's a lot of great new topics in there and a lot of good things to learn. So we're going to learn them together, as they say. We're going to go through the entire process together, and then for the next number of years, we'll be learning this content. Always something different, always something new. And then in the meantime, we've got all of the 501 we can keep working on until July 31st. And if you're working on that, keep going. You can do it, and we'll get through both of these together. As always, if you have any questions, you can always hit me on my website. The Contact Us link is at the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website. Check the calendar for the next study group event. Make sure you sign up for the notification list so you'll know what will be happening. And if you like the study group today, make sure you click that thumbs up on the video. We'd love for you to subscribe to our channel as well. Thank you for being here. We will see you next time on the Security Plus Study Group.